Chapter 174. Meng Hun listened carefully, but in the end he still didn't understand what she meant. Jiang Pingji continued to speak tirelessly. I'm afraid you don't know that because of the drought in the surrounding counties, many people have no choice but to become bandits and hide in the deep mountains near Hejian County. In recent days, bandits have been raiding houses more frequently. If there's a riot, the people will definitely be uneasy. Meng Hun vaguely understood and asked, Lang Jun, are you worried that the people will be in chaos and the bandits will take the opportunity to rebel? She nodded but then slowly shook her head. You're only half right. You haven't mentioned the other half, the most important part. Meng Hun didn't understand. He was just a crude person. Even if he was meticulous, his brain couldn't compare to those black-hearted people. If the people's hearts are in chaos, how do you think they will react? Jiang Pingji guided him until a look of realization appeared on his face. Then she continued. Food is the most important thing to the people. No matter when or where, filling their stomachs is the most important thing for the people. However, it had only been a month since the spring plowing had ended. If news of this matter were to spread, they would have to wait for the summer planting, and it would be far from the autumn harvest. The farmers spent more than half of their harvest last year. What do you think will happen if someone deliberately spreads rumors, such as that the army will spread to Hejian County? Meng Hun's mouth and tongue were dry as if there was a fire burning in his throat. He said with some uncertainty, if that's the case, the people will definitely rush to buy rice to prevent the war from spreading. When the time comes, they won't have enough to eat, and the rice merchants will naturally take advantage of the situation to raise the price and make a fortune. When he left Meng County, the price of rice had already soared to 5 to 6 times the usual price. Even with such a high price, the demand was still not enough. It was easy to imagine how the profit-seeking merchants would make use of this opportunity to make a fortune. The price of grain could soar from 5 to 6 times the original price to more than 10 times, or even dozens of times. More than that. You seem to have forgotten how many bandits there are around Hejian County. They don't have food, so they rely on robbing to survive. How are they going to survive when the war broke out? It's impossible for us to buy from the rice merchants. We can only rob the commoners. Hearing this, Meng Hun was completely stunned. He was also born in poverty and had tasted hunger before. He had even seen people who were so hungry that they dug up grass and tree roots to eat. If he couldn't even dig up grass or tree roots, he would go and eat something called guanyin clay, causing his stomach to become as big as a bucket and causing him to explode to death. Even worse, they would steal other people's children. If someone starved to death, their corpse would be eaten by others instead of being buried. Hejian County looked prosperous, but there were many hidden dangers in the dark. Meng Hun and the others followed Meng Liang to Hejian County. They hid in the deep mountains and forests. During that time they encountered some traces of bandits. However, he did not want to alert the enemy, nor did he want to increase his losses, so he deliberately avoided them. Now that he thought about it, he felt a chill run down his spine. Because they were unfamiliar with the place and the people, they did not dare to go deep into the forest. They only moved around or hunted within a certain range. But in such a place, Meng Hun found the traces of more than one group of bandits. What did this mean? It meant that the seemingly peaceful Hejian County was now surrounded by bandits. Normally, those fugitives would exercise some restraint. Even if they robbed houses, they didn't dare to go too far and kill people. But if there was a civil war in Meng County, Song Prefecture, what would those bandits do? They needed to survive, they needed food, and they needed to make a fortune during the chaos. Whenever there was a civil war, the government would not be able to control them. If that happened, would they still behave themselves like they usually did? Meng Hun did not know what the butterfly effect was, but he knew that if Hejian County became like that, he had a lot to do with it. For a moment he seemed to be speechless and could not say a word. The other subordinates also fell into silence. They all came from poor families and had suffered a lot. How could they not understand? Jiang Pingji sighed and said, but I have a way to force down the price of food. Maybe it can ease the situation a little. Meng Hun suddenly looked up and stared at her. After a long time he finally said something. What do you plan to do, Lang Jun? Is there anything I can do for you? She raised her hand and pinched between her eyebrows tiredly. She seemed to be exhausted. I originally wanted to buy some food from Hu County. You know that my father is the county chief of Hu County. That place has been well managed by him. The drought has been greatly alleviated by using underground water. Now Hu County is 1,000 miles of fertile land and there is a surplus of food every year. Meng Hun nodded with yearning and agreed. I often hear merchants talking about this. They say that Hu County used to be empty and full of starving people. But after Chief Lu took office, the situation has been getting better and better. Now it is a place that people yearn for. Speaking of this, he paused for a moment and said awkwardly, You're trying to alleviate the food shortage in Hejian County with rice from Hu County. This is indeed a good thing, but you're still young and don't have much money with you. Even if Chief Lu agrees with you, I'm afraid that the money and effort you'll spend will be incalculable. Moreover, you might even arouse the jealousy of others. It was not easy to be a philanthropist. The chief of Hejian County might not want to see such a good thing that could win the people's hearts. Jiang Pingji said helplessly, What you said is right. But if I don't do it, should I just stand by and watch? Meng Hun was stumped by her question and was momentarily speechless. She continued, If there was a better source of rice, why wouldn't I do it? But who would be willing to be so generous? Who would have so much rice in their warehouse? In today's world, everyone looks out for themselves. Who would be willing to help the people? The questions stunned all the men in the room. They could not think of a solution either. At that moment, the young man whom Jiang Pingji thought was cute suddenly had an "I got it" expression on his face. He pointed at Meng Liang, who was still struggling, and stammered, He can do it. Everyone was dumbfounded. They looked like they were saying, Are you kidding me? If Meng Liang had a good heart, would the county chief have been forced into such a desperate situation? Jiang Pingji understood immediately before they could react, but she was still hesitant. Meng Hun saw her expression and knew that she had an idea, but she was too embarrassed to say it. If you have any good ideas, you can tell me. If I can be of use, I will not refuse. Chapter 175. Meng Hun also understood why Jiang Pingji was silent. This method was indeed somewhat immoral. The others also realized that they wanted to use Meng Liang to exchange for food. But the county captain wanted to kill Meng Liang. If they used him to exchange for food, wouldn't they be letting him continue to cause trouble? No way. Are we going to let this little bastard go? If we use him as a hostage and ask the Mengs to give us food, he will definitely hold a grudge against us. Lang Jun and the county captain will be implicated. If we miss this opportunity, it will be hard to kill him in the future. I don't want to let this bastard go so easily. I don't want to let him go so easily. They all had the same opinion, but they were hesitant. Meng Hun clenched his fists unwillingly. Listening to their conversation, Meng Liang's heart felt like it was on a roller coaster. It went up and down and it kept shaking. He had thought he was going to die, but now he felt like he could still save him. Based on his understanding of Meng Hun, he had a high chance of surviving. When he found his entourage or returned to the Mengs, he would kill every single one of them. No, he couldn't let them die too easily. He had to torture them ruthlessly before he could vent his anger. After a long time, Meng Hun loosened his fists. His palms were bleeding from his nails, but he didn't feel it. Let him write a letter asking for food. Meng Hun unwillingly clenched his teeth and secretly swallowed back the iron that was rising in his throat. His eyes were red as he said, Let him keep his life. We still have a chance next time. Meng Liang laughed so hard that his stomach hurt. Jiang Pingji silently reflected on herself as she listened to the others. Was her heart really that black? Host V. #smirking. They are a group of honest boys. I can't bear to see them like this. The viewers in the streaming room also thought that Meng Liang would not die. They were filled with righteous indignation. But when they saw Jiang Pingji's bullet screen, some of the more experienced viewers lit candles for Meng Liang. Ye Qingzhou, #laughter cry. Can I say that I was also tricked by the streamer? He had thought that Meng Liang was not going to die. Lao Ciji Lianming, I want to repent. I've shamed my ID. The host is such a black-hearted person. How could she slap herself in the face? She said she would kill Meng Liang gracefully. She would never let him live to see tomorrow's sun. Wei Dashan Yunji. I was wrong. I should have believed that the streamer was not a good person. Years pass between fingers. The streamer is such a bad person. I bet that poor Meng Liang thought he could be saved. Ace Huohua. Light a row of candles for Meng Liang. At the same time, I feel sorry for the house full of honest boys. Jiang Pingji controlled her expression very well. She wore a solemn and dignified expression as she went to another room to fetch a brush and ink. He turned to Meng Liang and said, "Write it. If you don't want to suffer, then don't play tricks." Meng Liang snorted. His expression was arrogant. He looked at Jiang Pingji as if his eyes had been dipped in poison. Once he regained his freedom, not only would he humiliate Meng Liang and the other uncouth men, but he would also strip them of their power and make them unable to be men. He would also throw them into the South College where they would receive lowly guests. After he was done torturing them and playing with them, he would kill them. He would not let Lu Shi go. Lu Shi's fate would be 100 times worse than Meng Hun's. The entire Lu family would be buried with him. Meng Liang was used to being unscrupulous. Even though he was still under the control of others, he was certain that Jiang Pingji and the others would not dare to do anything to him. He did not know how to restrain himself. The hatred in his eyes almost dyed his eyes red. It was as if he would pounce on someone and bite them the next second. Seeing Meng Liang's reaction, the others were worried. "Just you wait." Meng Liang swore in his heart. Jiang Pingji seemed to know what he wanted to say. Instead, she smiled at him provocatively. Meng Liang snorted again. Just as he was about to say that he could not move his wrist and could not write, he realized that his right hand, which had been unable to move before, was gradually regaining consciousness. He rubbed it a few times and it returned to normal. It was as if his previous weakness was just an illusion. He did not have the spare capacity to think. He picked up the brush, got used to the feeling, and then started writing. Although Meng Liang was not a good person, his handwriting was very good. The viewers in the live streaming room all expressed that they could not accept it. Wai-Yunji. If anyone tells me that handwriting is like a person, I will slap them in the face. Meng Liang's actions as well as his way of life were the greatest mockery of this saying. After a while, Meng Liang finished writing and stamped his own seal on it. The content was simple and easy to understand. There was not much talent and there were no traps in the writing. He was too arrogant. Meng Liang was certain that Jiang Pingji and the others would not dare to do anything to him. If that was the case, why would he need to do anything to the bamboo slip? It was only a few hundred dawn of grain. For the Mengs, such a small amount of grain was more than what was rotting in the rice barn every year. Jiang Pingji dried the ink on the bamboo slip with candlelight. After confirming that there were no problems, she rolled up the bamboo slip in satisfaction. In contrast to her satisfaction, the county chief looked as if he had lost his soul. His face was deathly pale. Yes, his enemy was so close at hand. He could choke him to death with a single move, but he could not. How could he not be angry? Meng Liang was even more proud of himself. However, Jiang Pingji's next sentence sent him straight from heaven to hell. "No problem. Let's settle our grudges and grievances." Meng Hun, Meng Liang, huh? Did they hear it wrong? That was what everyone was thinking at the moment. Jiang Pingji looked at them with confusion. She waved the bamboo slip in her hand. "I only asked Meng Liang to write a letter to ask for grain from the Mengs. I didn't say you can't take revenge. Repay kindness with kindness and repay hatred with hatred. That is the way of the world. Meng Liang will be a disaster if we let him live." They could not wrap their heads around it. Drifting on a curve, they almost got into an accident. "But, Langjun, if he dies, how will the Mengs give us the grain?" Jiang Pingji said, "Send a letter and ask the Mengs to send the grain according to the letter. Kidnappers kidnap hostages and blackmail them. That's the normal procedure, isn't it? As for Meng Liang, he is in our hands. Isn't it just a matter of whether he lives or dies? If they give him the grain, he might live. But if they don't give him the grain, he will definitely die. It's up to the Mengs whether they want to give him the grain or not." How long would it take to go from heaven to hell? Chapter 176. Ye Qingzhou, my heart aches for Meng Liang. I've already taken a screenshot of his face. Now I've added a dumbfounded sentence. A's Huahua, my heart aches +1. I feel like he's in a daze. The viewers in the streaming room were right. Meng Liang was indeed in a daze. This was different from what he had imagined. He roared angrily and tried his best to speak. Perhaps it was a blessing from the heavens, but his voice slowly returned. At first he was still slurring and couldn't speak smoothly. You're a piece of sh*t. Although his words were vague, Meng Hun understood what he was trying to say. He lifted his foot and kicked Meng Liang's cheek. Half of Meng Liang's face swelled up and a warm metallic taste spread in his mouth. The force was so great that the other half of his face fell to the ground and scraped against the ground. When had he ever been treated like this? He had always been the one who kicked others, not the other way around. Meng Liang spat out a few teeth that had fallen out from the kick and mumbled, "B** cheese. You're a piece of **T. You're about to die and you still dare to curse? Today, I will avenge my wife and daughter who died in vain. Meng Liang, you're the one who will die a horrible death." Meng Hun stepped forward and grabbed Meng Liang's hair. He was so strong that it seemed like he was going to tear his scalp off. Jiang Pingji covered her slightly raised lips with the bamboo slips. Her eyes were like stars in the night sky. She mouthed a few words. "Goodbye, Meng Liang. Ye Qingzhou, the streamer is so bad and dangerous, but why am I so mesmerized by her smile? The matchstick that sells girls. Critical hit." She emptied the baby's health bar in one hit. I've been watching the stream quietly. At first I didn't have any feelings for the streamer until that smile. Felt like Cupid had stabbed his heart with a sword. All the cells in his body were screaming in excitement. He was completely mesmerized by the streamer. Mutual harm. Although I have a boyfriend at that moment, I wanted to be gay for her. Bai Gui Yeshing, what's the big deal about being gay for the streamer? I wanted to straighten it out for her, but her aura made my legs weak. Many fans in the streaming room wanted to stand up for Jiang Pingji. Inside the room, Meng Hun's heart was beating faster. The excitement of getting his revenge took over his senses, and it even brought out the violence in his heart. However, his rationality won out. No matter how much he hated Meng Liang, he couldn't do anything cruel. Wouldn't it be too easy to kill this little bastard just like that? Some people felt that they were at a disadvantage. Meng Liang had done so many things that had angered the heavens and the people. If he didn't suffer a little, he would be letting him off easy. Meng Hun said, "Just because he's a savage beast doesn't mean we have to use the same methods to teach him a lesson. Using violence to curb violence is indeed very satisfying, but we can't lose ourselves because of it. Furthermore, what's so satisfying about torturing someone who's about to die? Even if what Meng Hun said was **T, everyone would still think that it made sense, not to mention that what he said was quite reasonable. But I'm not willing to kill him just like that. I feel like something is missing in my heart." Meng Hun thought about it and said in a low voice, "Do you think that by torturing him he will repent for what he's done?" Meng Hun thought about it and said in a low voice, "Do you think that by torturing him he will repent for what he's done?" Meng Hun shook his head. Everyone knew Meng Liang's personality. He was stubborn and unrepentant. "We won't torture him, but we won't give him a quick death. Since he's so afraid of death, we'll make a few small cuts on his wrists and let him have a taste of his own blood." After a long time, Meng Hun opened his mouth. His calm voice carried a hint of coldness. "I want to him breathe." By then, Jiang Pingji had already left the room. She wasn't in the mood to watch Meng Hun's revenge. Turning a person who was originally loyal and honest into a ruthless and malicious person was not a positive thing to see. Since the start of the semi-interactive streaming mission, the system had been playing dead. It didn't take the initiative to talk to Jiang Pingji. After all, they had almost fallen out with each other. However, the system was thick-skinned. It had only been a short while, but it took the initiative to talk to her. "Host, I think you're scary." Jiang Pingji snickered to herself. Scary? If it knew how scary she was, the system wouldn't have stepped on her bottom line and done things that she hated. He was just pretending to be confused. Fortunately, it was her. If it was an ordinary host, she didn't know what the system would do to her. Jiang Pingji's relaxed mood became a little heavier because of the system. Jiang Pingji didn't look up. Have you ever seen a bad guy who isn't scary? If you have, it only means that the bad guy isn't bad enough. She had sharp ears and eyes. Even though they were separated by 2 rooms, she could clearly hear Meng Liang's frightened whimpers. The next second she heard Meng Hun say coldly, "Shut his mouth." Jiang Pingji leaned against a pillar lazily. System finished the mission. As soon as she finished, the system executed it immediately. It seemed like it was trying to please Jiang Pingji. System. Streamer Jiang Pingji's first semi-interactive streaming has ended perfectly. Dear viewers, are you satisfied? A. Satisfied. B. Average. C. Not satisfied. At that moment, Jiang Pingji was too lazy to say anything to entice the audience to vote. She could vote whatever they wanted. She was too lazy to serve them. But even though she was too lazy to serve them, there were many enthusiastic viewers in the streaming room who helped her get votes. It wasn't the first time they voted. Many experienced viewers expressed that they understood and gave a satisfied rating. Not only did they give a satisfied vote, but they also incessantly increased the number of votes on the streaming screen to get others to give a satisfied rating as well. In order to have a better stream, it was necessary to give a satisfied vote. Therefore, the final result was much better than the original plan. With a total of 10,000 votes, there were 9,235 satisfied votes, 622 average votes, and 143 dissatisfied votes. Although the satisfaction rate was high, it was lower than the first time by a few percentage points. More importantly, the satisfaction rate did not reach the standard of a gold chest. Regrettably, it was a silver chest. Jiang Pingji listened to the system's notification. She didn't ask Master Liaochen about her luck that day. She opened it. It was another card. But it wasn't a streamer's level-up card. It was a card with an alluring and sexy nude girl drawn on it. She had big breasts, a slender waist, and long legs. Her legs were slightly closed, and her arms were lazily folded in front of her chest. She seemed to be revealing but not covering. Jiang Pingji was speechless. It seemed like the viewers in the streaming room couldn't see the card in her hand. Otherwise, they felt like their wisdom would be ruined. Chapter 177. XX Masterpiece. 9 Winding Corridors, Wonderful and Unpredictable. You deserve it. No man will be able to leave your charm. Men will be intoxicated and unable to extricate themselves from it. You will truly have a harem of 3,000 beauties and 3,000 dotes on you. From then on, the king will not attend morning court. Jiang Pingji, system, damn it. System. She suddenly smiled. Her smile was as bright as the morning sun, but the words she said were chilling. You'd better remember this. The system felt wronged. It was the scapegoat. Was it to be blamed for not getting a good card? However, according to the main plot of the palace intrigue system, this card did not disappoint Jiang Pingji's reputation as the lucky emperor. If it were the previous host, she would have to accumulate a huge amount of popularity points before she could redeem it from the system store. Jiang Pingji did not need to spend anything. She randomly drew a silver treasure chest and got the most valuable one. How was that not popular? However, the system did not dare to say this out loud. It was afraid of being scolded by Jiang Pingji. Was there any other system in the world that could live such a sullen life like it? The system followed Jiang Pingji's wishes and said, since the host doesn't like it, you can sell it to the system store. Jiang Pingji did not even bother to lift her eyelids. What she said made the system tremble in fear, but it was also secretly delighted. When did I say I didn't like it? She did not wait for the system to be happy. She continued, there are benefits to keeping it. Which man has enough rationality to control himself? There are only a few who can control themselves. The higher their position, the more unscrupulous they are and the more conceited they are. She could imagine what those men who had multiple wives and concubines were thinking. If they liked women, they would pamper them. If they did not like them, they would be left aside for a period of time. They wouldn't hate each other, they would only scheme against each other. They would do their best to attract his attention and love. What was the purpose of the infighting in the backyard and the bloodshed? To monopolize the man's love? Or to obtain the husband's love? Then they would kill the unborn babies in the wombs of other women with a clear conscience. Their words were full of sarcasm and jealousy. Their faces were detestable. Or was it just for the sake of wearing better clothes, eating better food, and being surrounded by servants and escorting him around? Jiang Pingji was disgusted by the abnormal atmosphere of that era. He was extremely disgusted and wanted to vomit every time he thought about it. What made her even more disgusted was that there was a system in her brain that constantly reminded her of this fact. What is palace intrigue? In essence, wasn't this a monkey show that was full of clowns fighting over the right to use a man's organs? Jiang Pingji's emotions were tumbling. On the other side, the system's heart slowly became active. The host's words meant, she's interested in palace fighting now? It said that a woman's appearance and figure were her natural weapons. To conquer a world, a woman only needed to conquer the man who conquered the world. Why was there a need to work so hard? Even if she was a strong woman, she still had the heart of a little woman. She looked forward to being protected, held in the palm of someone's hand and praised to the heavens. I don't like that kind of man. To put it nicely, he's a man, but to put it bluntly, he's just a creature that's led by the nose by his body's desires. The reason why humans are intelligent creatures and can step out of the shackles of Earth and enter the interstellar stage is because they are rational and not driven by instinct like animals, Jiang Pingji said calmly as she played with the card with a somewhat shameful pattern in her hand. After hearing what she said, the system suddenly became emotional like a frosted eggplant. The corner of its mouth twitched as it said, "According to your standards, it seems that there are no men or women in this world, only living creatures." Jiang Pingji sneered. You can't be so absolute. Don't kill everyone with one blow. Bad bamboo can still grow good bamboo shoots. The system snorted. You're so demanding. I feel that you won't be able to get married in this lifetime. As a palace intrigue system, why did it choose such a perversely demanding host? There was no solution. She replied casually, then I'll marry the one I think is the best. It's either the best or none. The system was confused. If that was the case, shouldn't Jiang Pingji hate the card in her hand? As if sensing its confusion, Jiang Pingji said, although it's quite disgusting, you have to admit that those who are dominated by instinct are indeed easier to deal with. This card is very evil, but if one day it was used on a woman with a peerless appearance, no man would be able to escape from the combination of appearance and figure. The land of gentleness is the grave of a hero. The power of seduction was great, and with the help of the card its combat power was off the charts. The system was speechless. Jiang Pingji raised an eyebrow and said with contempt, "Do you think that I'll use it on myself?" The system laughed awkwardly, not daring to answer directly. If it answered yes, it was sure that Jiang Pingji would spit it to death. The streaming room was closed. Jiang Pingji closed her eyes and felt the peace that she hadn't felt in a long time. After some time, a strong smell of blood floated to her nose. She opened her eyes and happened to meet Meng Hun's gaze. "He's dead? And you've avenged him?" she asked. Meng Hun was sitting not far from her. His forehead was still covered in dust from kowtowing. He looked pale and haggard. Jiang Pingji asked again, "What's the matter?" Meng Hun hesitated, not knowing if he should speak. She saw through Meng Hun's thoughts and said, "Those people can only live well if you're alive because you're their backbone. Meng Liang is dead and you've avenged him. What do you plan to do next? If you want to kill yourself and let me cut off your head to answer to the Mengs, don't. Suicide is the behavior of a coward." Meng Hun looked embarrassed. Jiang Pingji had already said what he wanted to say. What else could he say? "I asked you before if you want to come to the Luz. What's your answer now?" Jiang Pingji said, "You just need to say yes or no. If you want, I'll take care of the rest for you. The Mengs will soon be too busy to take care of themselves." Meng Hun's thick lips moved. Hesitation and struggle flashed across his face. All in all, he and Jiang Pingji had only known each other for less than a day. But he was indeed moved. "Do you want to leave your name in history?" Jiang Pingji asked Meng Hun while leaning against a pillar. She propped up her right leg and rested her wrist on her right knee. Meng Hun's eyes were wide open and he seemed to be in a daze. What did he hear? Leave his name in history? Was she talking about him? Meng Hun felt as if he had heard something very important. His mind told him that he shouldn't continue listening, but his body was very honest. It was even a little eager. Chapter 178. There are countless nameless people in this world, but only a few people will be remembered by future generations. Some people lived in obscurity, and only 2 or 3 generations of descendants remembered them after they died. When these descendants also turned to dust, who would remember their names? But some people, even if they have been dead for hundreds or thousands of years, still live in the memory of others. That is the real immortality. To put it simply, it was like living in vain if one did not do something big in one's life. Yes, Jiang Pingji was recruiting people to her side to prepare for her big plan. Meng Hun listened to Jiang Pingji's words and had a strange and palpitating feeling. He felt his mouth was dry and after a long time he said bitterly, "Lengjun, what do you mean?" Jiang Pingji suddenly smiled. "Instead of hiding your identity and living in seclusion in the wilderness, why don't you follow me?" Meng Hun was shocked. His eyes were full of shock and embarrassment and he was eager to try. But aren't you afraid that the Mengs will come to you?" Meng Hun felt that he needed to calm his restless heart. It was too dangerous. Didn't I say? If you want, I will take care of the rest for you. The Mengs are just grasshoppers after autumn. How long can they jump around? History is just a piece of white paper written by the winner. If you want, you can make them infamous for thousands of years. Jiang Pingji's voice seemed to have the power to bewitch people, and she was luring Meng Hun into the trap bit by bit. How much praise you will receive in the future will be how much they will be criticized. Don't you think that the blueprint is too tempting? Indeed, very tempting. Meng Hun's breath was slightly heavy and he could not help but swallow. The scene in front of him seemed to be shrouded by the future she spoke of. But even so, Meng Hun's reason still prevailed. Why would Lang Jun have such a rebellious thought? Jiang Pingji sneered and said in a strange voice, rebellious. Meng Hun slowly regained his reason, and he wanted to suppress the throbbing in his heart so that he could not even defend the basic line of defense. Don't you think your idea is rebellious? She shook her head and asked with a smile. Do you think my idea is rebellious to the royal family of Dongqing or to the Mengs in Songzhou? Look at the court today, when has it ever been clean? Look at the people today, when did they ever have enough to eat? Meng Hun, touch your heart and tell me, were you loyal to the royal family of Dongqing or the Meng family of Songzhou? Every question was like a brick hitting Meng Hun's heart, making him unable to speak. You don't have to answer me. Everything is clear from the moment you still call me Lang Jun instead of a rebel. Meng Hun suddenly felt powerless. He didn't even dare to face Jiang Pingji's gaze. Meng Pingji, we're all right. Let's not talk about this. Jiang Pingji snorted through her nose. She listened to the mockery. Based on the current situation, how long do you think this illusion of peace can be maintained? Didn't your old boss, the Meng family, already cause the people of Songzhou to be filled with resentment and a military disaster? She said leisurely, let's not talk about the internal problems and just talking about the external problems. Dongqing is also in imminent danger. So, everyone in the world has the right to fight for it. Why can't I? The founder of the Xia dynasty once said that he was the emperor's mandate. If so, why couldn't his descendants protect the country? Why did so many people rebel against the Xia dynasty? Is this the so-called emperor's mandate? I don't believe it. Meng Hun's eyes flashed with panic and anxiety as he listened to her. Be careful, Lang Jun. The walls have ears. Jiang Pingji clicked her tongue and said, don't worry. The only people who can hear these words are you and me. No matter how good the walls have ears, they can't hide from me. Otherwise, why would I be here telling you these things? Do I look like a careless person? She was arrogant, but she was not stupid. Did she think that she was as brainless as Meng Liang? She only dared to say that because she had someone to rely on. Meng Hun was completely convinced, but he still had a doubt in his heart. Even though he knew that if he asked, he would be looking for trouble. Lang Jun, you trust me so much. Have you ever thought about what would happen if I didn't mean what you said? Meng Hun knew that he was looking for trouble. After all, no matter how he answered the question, it would not be right. Jiang Pingji glanced at Meng Hun and asked, are you saying that your willingness to commit suicide for your brother was just an act? Of course not. So I'm not worried. Jiang Pingji looked down and said casually, if I'm wrong about you, then I'm blind. Thus Meng Hun got on Jiang Pingji's boat without knowing why. If I'm blind, I'll get rid of you, she added with a smile. Meng Hun was speechless. Wait, why did it feel like something was wrong with Lang Jun? Before Meng Hun could think about it, Jiang Pingji had already changed the topic. This is the Lu Manor. There's an ice cellar here. You can store Meng Liang's body there to prevent maggots from rotting. Jiang Pingji didn't need to look to know how Meng Liang died. He was bleeding to death and he must have suffered a great shock before dying. What an unlucky child. If there was reincarnation in this world, he had to be careful before reincarnating. He didn't want to fall into her hands again. Oh, no need to burn it. Scatter the ashes anywhere. It seemed like a waste to store Meng Liang's body in an ice cellar. How can I do that? Jiang Pingji couldn't help but laugh. She said in a sinister tone, it's hard enough for him to bury his son. If he knew that his son's ashes were scattered everywhere, or his body was rotting with maggots, wouldn't that be too cruel? Meng Hun was speechless. Was it not cruel to keep his son's body and then send it over? He felt that he was overthinking. Jiang Pingji not only had a kind side to her, but she also had a cruel side to her. But it was no wonder. Otherwise, Why would a pure kind-hearted person say something so shocking? The blood has to be cleaned up. The weather is getting warmer. If we don't clean it up, it will smell bad and attract mosquitoes and flies. Jiang Pingji said, you and your subordinates should temporarily drop your old names and disguise yourselves. I'll arrange for you to go to the farm to lie low for a while. Farm? Meng Hun smiled and asked, is it the farm from before? Chapter 179. Exterminate the bandits? Meng Hun found it hard to believe. Even the government didn't bother to send troops to deal with the bandits, which made them a scourge. He didn't expect his Lang Jun would want to do that, but where would she get the manpower? Yes, but you don't have to worry. Since I dared to use the few people I have to deal with this matter, I naturally have absolute confidence. Jiang Pingji was not stupid. If she was not careful, she would lose her life. She might even lose all the people in her hands. Since she dared to do it, she naturally had 100% confidence. To put it bluntly, she was very calculative and would not do a losing business. Meng Hun didn't understand what kind of trump card his Lang Jun had. How could she be so confident that she dared to confront the bandits? However, he soon found out why. Jiang Pingji took out a piece of bamboo paper that was folded into the size of a palm and handed it to him. Unfold it and you'll know why I dare to do it. Meng Hun did as he was told. He turned the bamboo paper over and finally found the right angle. Then, as the former commandant of the Meng family, he was so shocked that he almost threw away the bamboo paper in his hand. However, he was still rational and restrained himself. He carefully folded the bamboo paper according to its original shape. That cautious and considerate look was as if he was handling a precious treasure. Although it was just a drawing, it was priceless to Meng Hun. This drawing. Meng Hun was a warrior without much education, but he was literate and had read some books. He had been the commandant of the county for so many years, so his eyes and knowledge were far better than those of ordinary warriors. At first he didn't understand what the picture was. However, when he carefully read the small annotations, a huge idea suddenly arose in his mind. His heart trembled. At the same time, he felt deeply that Jiang Pingji trusted him. He felt more and more at ease. He was no longer the commandant of Meng County. Life was full of ups and downs and he was at the lowest point of his life. He even wanted to die. But as a man who didn't want to make a name for himself and leave his name in history, Jiang Pingji's words hit the soft spot in Meng Hun's heart. He didn't have the loftiness of the others. He didn't feel that it was a waste of talent for him to go from a commandant to a young child subordinate. Jiang Pingji bet that he could be trusted. Wasn't he also betting that she could be loyal to him? He was broad-minded and full of lofty sentiments. Based on this alone, even if he had no power or influence, he was still 1,000,000 times better than some nobles. Who could be sure that this unknown kid wouldn't become famous in the 9 states in the future? Meng Hun's mind was completely focused on the drawing Jiang Pingji had given him. It was the crossbow drawing he had shown Su Ku before. Even Su Ku, who didn't know much about it, could see its value. How could Meng Hun, a professional martial artist, not see it? This thing has already been made? He tried hard to suppress his excited voice so as not to embarrass himself. Jiang Pingji shook her head regretfully and said, currently the craftsmen are still rushing to make the crossbow. Although the crossbow is feasible, the wood required is relatively delicate. If it's not tough enough, it won't be able to unleash its original power, and the shooting range won't be as far as expected. Meng Hun felt a little regretful, but he wasn't too disappointed. This crossbow is half the size of a normal bow and it's light and portable. It's very suitable for rapid combat. After Meng Hun understood the contents of the drawing, he was excited. He also understood why Jiang Pingji was so confident in suppressing the bandits. Training a soldier into a sharpshooter with 100% accuracy not only required a lot of time and energy, but it also had high requirements for the trainee. Eyesight, arm strength, and the ability to judge the surrounding environment were all indispensable. If the painstakingly trained soldier was injured on the battlefield, resulting in a problem with his arm or vision, the soldier would basically be useless. Naturally, it meant that the cost of training the soldier would be wasted. However, if the crossbows described in the blueprints were made, even the most ordinary soldiers would only need a little bit of training. It wouldn't take much effort, manpower, or cost to train them into existences comparable to godly archers. Even if they were slightly inferior, they wouldn't be too bad. Moreover, how many sharpshooters were there today who could shoot with such accuracy? As long as they had the crossbows, they could quickly train as many soldiers who were good at shooting as the craftsmen could make them. Because it was light and easy to carry, they could carry it on their back. They could carry a few days' worth of food and enough arrows to travel through the dense forest. Those bandits would have been shot full of holes by the crossbow before they could even get close to them. It was no wonder that his Lang Jun was so confident. If it were someone else, they would have to pay a huge price to eliminate the bandits. However, there was one thing that Meng Hun didn't quite understand. Even the government didn't care about the bandits. It could even be said that they didn't have the energy to deal with them. Why did his Lang Jun want to do that? Faced with this question, Jiang Pingji thought about it and said to him, "If I'm lying, I'll tell you that I'm a living bodhisattva. It's my duty to punish the evil. But if I'm telling the truth, it's definitely not like that." Meng Hun was speechless. "The truth is, you need money to recruit soldiers and buy horses. I'm so poor that I don't even have money in my pocket. How can I afford to buy young strong men?" Jiang Pingji snorted. Meng Hun looked calm on the surface, but there was an indescribable subtle feeling in his heart. She continued, "Most of the bandits are young people who can't make a living anymore. Although there are some problems with them, we can't say that all of them are undesirable. If we choose carefully, we can still pick out some good seedlings." Meng Hun was speechless. He believed that reason. Jiang Pingji's joking expression suddenly turned serious. "As for the other reason, it's what I've told you before. If we let the bandits gather and their power grow, I'm afraid that they will be restless when the news of the chaos in Meng County in Song Prefecture reaches here. Instead of waiting to face the bandits that are like locusts, it's better to seize the opportunity to divide them and break the relationship between the bandits." Meng Hun looked serious and said, "Lang Jun, you're far-sighted." Jiang Pingji added, "But it's true that I don't have money." Meng Hun was speechless. Why did he feel like he had boarded a pirate ship? He secretly scratched his head. Some doubts flashed across the serious face of the county military chief, but he quickly suppressed them. He had just joined his new master and needed to do something to prove himself. How could he have such a big misunderstanding about his Lang Jun? Chapter 180. Jiang Pingji was more concerned about the fact that they were the first members of the Lu family. She even personally came out to protect Meng Hun and his men. For the sake of caution, these people were all servants that the Lu family had just bought. Their birthplaces and origins could all be checked. However, Jiang Pingji seemed to be thinking too much. It was impossible for the guards at the gate to inspect the carriages of the Lu family. Only a greenhorn who had just taken up his post and did not know anything would carefully inspect the carriages of the nobles. If they met someone with a good temper, they might praise them for abiding by their duties and strictly enforcing the law. But if they met someone with a bad temper and disdain for the common people, anyone who dared to inspect the carriages and delay the nobles' time would definitely be taught a lesson. So when the guards saw the emblem of the Lu family on the carriages, they all put on flattering smiles and let them pass without further inspection. These guards were experienced guards of the city gates. They could recognize even the most inconspicuous emblem of a poor family in Hejian County. Not to mention the Lu family's current status was not bad. With Lu Shi, the county chief in the court, no one dared to take the initiative to provoke them. Jiang Pingji was happy to see them make things easier for them. Of course, she wouldn't say anything. Jiang Pingji didn't try to curry favor with them. She just said in a casual tone, "I've already sent people to prepare enough clothes and food. It should be enough for you to recuperate for a while. I don't think you can complain about the quality of life after chasing after Meng Liang these past few days." Meng Hun didn't think that his previous life was unbearable. He deserved the care of his new master. But when he thought of his brothers who helped him escape from the Meng family's army, he couldn't help but feel a little depressed. They didn't die on the spot. They didn't get the proper care after they were injured. Their condition worsened and they died of illness. He brought his brothers out of Meng County, but he couldn't even let them return to their homeland. He could only bury them in the wilderness. "I have a presumptuous request. I don't know if you can agree to it." Meng Hun cupped his hands in front of his chest. He was very serious. Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows and said, "If you have something to say, just say it. You don't have to worry about this or that. I'm not the kind of person who has too many taboos. I won't blame you for this. Just tell me." Meng Hun felt warm in his heart and said with some embarrassment, In addition to the brothers I brought out, there are 3 others hiding in the mountains. Are the injuries serious? Meng Hun said, before. With the thing you gave me, my illness was slightly suppressed. But my body is still very weak, so I can't move. Since that's the case, wait until you've settled down at the farm, then go to the mountain to receive them. There are many ferocious beasts in the forest. It's too dangerous for the 3 of you to stay there. You're being careless. Jiang Pingji's words warmed Meng Hun's heart. Meng Hun's face was full of shame. He didn't agree either and insisted on leaving one person to take care of the wounded. However, his brothers were stubborn and refused no matter what he said. How could Meng Hun dare to disappoint such sincere feelings? Only by killing their enemies with their own hands and taking revenge would they be able to get back at them. Thank you for your understanding, Lang Jun. Jiang Pingji didn't say anything. After all, to her it was as easy as lifting a finger, but to Meng Hun it was life-saving. The training of the farm is currently in Xiaoyu's hands, but after you go there I'll hand it over to you. When Meng Hun heard that, he was at a loss. He was a little flattered but also a little uneasy. Although he didn't know who Xiaoyu was, he knew the principle of first come, first served. If he went there and asked Xiaoyu to let go of his work, that didn't seem right. Although Meng Hun was a martial artist, he also knew the ways of the world. Jiang Pingji saw his uneasiness and said, "Don't think too much. We are short of people, so we use Xiaoyu as 2 people." Meng Hun was speechless. Suddenly he felt pity for Xiaoyu. What should he do? Did he know that he was being exploited by Lang Jun? Suddenly, a blurry figure appeared in Meng Hun's mind. It was the figure of him working diligently under Lang Jun's whip. If he knew you were going to take over, he would be happy. After all, it's not something he's good at. If he wants to do well, he needs to spend more energy and time. Jiang Pingji leaned against the table. Meng Hun was in the same car as her, and the others were in another rented car. And to be honest, you have actually met him before. Don't be too nervous. Xiaoyu is easy to get along with. Met him before? Meng Hun asked. He tried hard to recall the relevant memory, but he couldn't find it. Jiang Pingji smiled and said, that day he was the one with a white cloth wrapped around his face, sitting by the river and fishing. Meng Hun vaguely had an impression of him. He seemed to be a young boy. Anyway, they had met before. Meng Hun's nervousness gradually faded. He thought to himself, why should I worry about a young boy? However, Meng Hun would soon regret his thoughts. He was indeed a young boy, but he was in charge of finances and internal affairs. Su Ke could decide everyone's quality of life, but Meng Hun was clumsy with words. How could he be Su Ke's opponent? Soon the farm was close at hand. Meng Hun sighed in his heart. He didn't expect to come here for the second time with such an identity. When they arrived, Su Ke was still diligently supervising the training of the servants, or rather the troops. They didn't know if it was because Jiang Pingji had trained him before, but his appearance and mental state were much better than before. Hearing that his Lang Jun was here, Su Ke quickly stopped what he was doing and slightly tidied up his appearance. However, when he saw the strong man standing behind Jiang Pingji, Su Ke's polite smile froze on his face. Why is he here again? Xiaoyu, come and meet me. Jiang Pingji smiled at Su Ke and said, this is the new chief coach. His surname is Meng. Su Ke was speechless. How did they hook up in such a short time? Why didn't he know anything about it? He felt like he was still dreaming. The bullet screen was full of doubts, but Su Ke politely greeted Meng Hun. Seeing Su Ke greet him, Meng Hun subconsciously saluted him. Jiang Pingji was very satisfied with one of them. One was civil, one was military, one was internal, and the other was external. Since Coach Meng is here, I'll leave the training to him. As for the details, I'll talk to Coach Meng later. Before Jiang Pingji said anything, Su Ke already wanted to shake his hand. Meng Hun didn't expect her to shake his hand so quickly. He looked a little embarrassed. Jiang Pingji said to Su Ke impatiently, Coach Meng just arrived and you can't wait to shake my hand. It's as if I mistreated you before. Chapter 181. Su Ke was very clear about his own ability. A person's energy was limited and he couldn't do everything. Even if he could, it would take an unimaginable amount of time and energy. Compared to the final result, the investment was too high, and the loss outweighed the gain. Now that Meng Hun was here, it meant that he could get rid of the complicated things and have more time to study. Although the Lus were not the top aristocratic family, they had a rich collection of books. Suku couldn't imagine how many books there were. In the past he loved a book like it was a treasure and he would read it over and over again. Now he had a whole treasure house, but he had to spend so much energy on something he was not good at. How could he not feel sad? Now that Meng Hun had taken over some of the things, Suku couldn't be happier. Naturally, he didn't care about his Longjun's teasing. But Suku still had some doubts. When did his Longjun take over Meng Hun? Although he knew that Meng Hun was good at deceiving people, Meng Hun had seen the world. Why was he so easy to trick? While Meng Hun went to help his men settle down, Jiang Pingji tilted her head and glanced at Suku. Why are you looking at me like I'm a human trafficker? Suku sighed. Longjun's ability to persuade people is incomparable to those human traffickers. How long has it been and Captain Meng Hun has been subdued by you so easily? Really, speed is of the essence in war. It was so fast that I didn't even have time to react. As an accountant, he also needed time to make arrangements. As the general coach, Meng Hun's living quarters had to be spacious. Even though it couldn't be very nice, it still had to be clean and tidy. The previous batch of servants had been divided into several groups, and they were familiar with each other. Now that Meng Hun's subordinates had suddenly appeared, what if they didn't handle it well and the troops became hostile? Not to mention, Suku had to send someone to prepare bedding and clothes for them. Dinner should also be prepared for the people who had appeared out of nowhere. She came so suddenly and without any prior notice, he suddenly had the illusion that he was the housekeeper of the house. Speaking of which accountant would take care of so many messy trifles? Jiang Pingji's mouth twitched. Suku sounded as if she had done something to Meng Hun. This is probably fate. Just like how I met Xiaoyu, I should also meet Meng Hun. This time it was Suku's turn to be silent. Even though a long time had passed, he still hadn't forgotten the details of that day. Suku looked at Jiang Pingji speechlessly and whispered to her, "Since Coach Meng has surrendered, does that mean Meng Liang?" "Yes, I've received the letter." Jiang Pingji suddenly raised her lips. "That Meng Liang. Ah, luckily he had sharp eyes when he was reincarnated. Otherwise, with that brain of his, I don't know if he could live to grow up." His IQ was touching. Meng Liang's parents must have worked hard to give birth to a son with such a low IQ and raise him into such a useless person. Suku asked, "How much food did you ask for?" "About 500 stones. Meng Liang filled it in himself, but I think it's too little." "How many people can eat it?" Jiang Pingji snorted. She wasn't a beggar. She was looking down on her by asking for a few hundred dawn of food. Suku also said, 500 dawn is indeed too little. Since the Mengs don't lack food, we'll just ask for 2,000 dawn. Not to mention, the transportation team from Meng County to Hejin County will consume a huge amount of rice. While they were talking, they had increased the original price of 500 dawn of rice to 2,000 dawn. They were so arrogant that they deserved a beating. "But how do you plan to deliver this letter to the Mengs?" Suku picked up a brush and wrote a blackmailing letter with his left hand, which he wasn't used to using. The letter stated that Meng Liang was in his hands and that if they wanted to ransom him, they had to follow the letter. They would exchange rice for Meng Hun and would not accept bribes. They had to deliver the rice within X days after receiving the letter. Of course, Meng Hun was the kidnapper. Since he had already broken up with his old boss, it was okay to break up with him even more. Jiang Pingji heard that and chuckled. She said, "What's so difficult about this question? We don't have to send someone to deliver the letter all the way to the Mengs in Meng County. We just need to put the letter in the woodshed in the gambling house." Suku almost dropped the brush with his left hand. How could his Langjun be so capable? She knew everything. He felt that his brain was a little redundant and he was unhappy. "How can you be so sure?" Meng Liang came to Hejin County after getting rid of his entourage. In other words, it's very likely that the entourage took a detour when looking for Meng Liang. When they received the news that Meng Liang was locked up in the gambling house, it was highly likely that they would arrive 1 or 2 days later. More importantly, I didn't see any traces of Meng Liang's entourage last night. I'm guessing that they will arrive today or tomorrow at the latest. It didn't matter if Meng Liang was late by 1 day, 2 days, or 3 days. What mattered was that when those retinues arrived in Hejin County, they would definitely go to the woodshed in the gambling house to search for Meng Liang. In this way they would naturally see 2 obvious bamboo slips. If the entourage knew that Meng Liang was dead, they would be afraid of the Mengs pursuing the matter. Naturally they wouldn't dare to send the letter back. Maybe they would scatter and run for their lives. But what if they weren't sure whether Meng Liang was dead or not? Then the result would be completely different. Jiang Pingji continued leisurely. When they see the blackmail letter, they will think that the kidnappers have something to gain from it. Before their greed is satisfied, Meng Liang is still alive. In that case, they will definitely try their best to send the 2 letters back to Meng County in Song Prefecture as soon as possible so that Meng Liang won't be delayed and suffer. After they rescue Meng Liang, they might be able to make a great contribution. Meng Liang's death and his life were completely different. If he was dead, the Mengs wouldn't care if Meng Liang got rid of the entourage on his own. They would definitely make the entourage pay. If he was alive, even if the Mengs would punish the entourage for failing to watch over Meng Liang, they would still compensate the entourage double for Meng Liang's actions. To put it bluntly, Jiang Pingji was scheming that the entourage would risk their lives to send the 2 letters safely to the Mengs. Suku was speechless. Jiang Pingji couldn't help but laugh when she saw his hopeless expression. I know why you're asking for so many details. You're expecting me to ask you questions and then you'll tell me the same thing, aren't you? Chapter 182. Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows and smiled. I'll try to be more careful next time. Zuko wanted to laugh. He had never felt so tired before. Lang Jun was sometimes too smart. She was not happy being a subordinate because there was no sense of accomplishment. She was redundant. By the way, I asked the housekeeper to look into it. I heard that Xiaoyu has a widowed aunt. Is that true? Suku was startled by her sudden question. He answered, there is indeed an aunt. Why do you ask? I'm just asking. I can't not know who my subordinates have. Suku was suspicious. According to his understanding of his Langjun, she never liked to waste time and energy. But he had something to say when it came to his aunt. I see. Thank you for your concern. She has been a widow for many years. Her son died young. She lives alone and is quite poor. She occasionally sews or washes clothes for people to make a living. She helped me with my mother's funeral. When I was in prison, she was the only one who secretly sent me dry food and cakes. Originally, I wanted to wait for things to settle down before returning to my hometown to bring her here to spend the rest of her life. Since you mentioned it, I have a presumptuous request. It was the second time Jiang Pingji had heard the word, presumptuous request, that day. She could just say it directly. Your aunt is good to you. You should be filial to her. There is nothing that can't be said. I will send someone to Zisong County to pick her up. The road will be in the wilderness. I don't trust you to travel alone. Don't worry about it. Just focus on your work. Jiang Pingji could not help but reflect. Did she look like such an unreasonable person? If she did not mention it, Suku would probably hold it in for another month or 2 before asking. Suku did not know what she was thinking, but he was touched by Jiang Pingji's arrangement. After all, he was already a slave. His Langjun did not even need to be polite to him. It was reasonable for her to order him around. These days he did not even feel the slightest sense of inferiority or uneasiness of being a slave. Not only did he not feel that way, but he also forgot about it. It was only when he had to change the dressing for the tattoo on his face that he felt his heart bleed. The pain numbed him and he had no choice but to face this embarrassing fact. His encounter with his Langjun was not a pleasant one, but he had to admit that he was impressed by him after spending so much time with him. A gentleman would die for his bosom friend. Perhaps the young man in front of him, who was not even as tall as him, was the wise master he had been waiting for all his life? The next time you return to the manor, go and get a few months' salary in advance. Since we've brought the old lady here to enjoy her life, we can't let her work hard for a living. You're a young man, so you should treat it as a form of training for yourself. However, the elderly still need to take good care of themselves. From Jiang Pingji's point of view, the frail elderly and children belonged to the vulnerable and protected groups. Suku did not hesitate this time. Instead, he accepted her kindness generously. A penny stumps a hero. Suku, who was good at internal affairs, understood this very well. That was why he didn't decline pretentiously, because there was no need to. He didn't have any savings and he had to rely on the Lu residents. Even if he brought his aunt over, he wouldn't be able to take good care of her. That was one of the reasons why Suku was worried. Fortunately, his Langjun was considerate and understood his difficulties. If he didn't accept it, he would be crazy. Suku felt relieved, as if a heavy stone had been lifted from his heart. But soon he noticed that Jiang Pingji's eyes revealed a perplexed look, as if she was troubled by a difficult problem. Suku thought to himself, what kind of problem can make this young Langjun so perplexed? He felt that he couldn't miss this opportunity. If she had any problems, he would definitely solve them. Don't think about that problem, let him do it. Langjun, you look perplexed. What's troubling you? Suku asked softly. Jiang Pingji glanced at him and said, I'm thinking about a problem and I seem to have an answer. What problem? Even the smart and quick-witted Langjun can't figure it out? Suku felt that it was time for him to show off his skills. Let me give you an example. Jiang Pingji pointed at Suku. He looked confused. She said, my original plan was that you worked hard and should be rewarded. But after my father reminded me, I realized that you would enjoy it more if you cared more about your family. The reward is the same, but obviously you prefer the latter. This time Suku was completely dumbfounded. He wanted to show his talent. After all, even his Langjun couldn't solve it. If he could solve it, he would be more valued. But when she asked the question, he was speechless. He didn't know how to answer. He thought that she was making fun of him, but when he looked at her expression carefully, he realized that she really didn't understand. Suddenly, Suku didn't know whether he should laugh or cry. If he knew that there was a word called cute in the world, he would know how he felt just now. His Langjun had a strange sense of cuteness. According to Ku, this can't be generalized. It varies from person to person. Suku wasn't that harsh to Jiang Pingji. After all, she was just a 12-year-old boy. The ways of the world required not only talent but also experience. If she didn't understand, she could teach or learn. It varies from person to person? Yes. For example, Coach Meng. The thing you asked me to prepare is what he needs now. It's what he needs. Even if it's not expensive, it's enough. As for Auntie, I've always wanted to bring Auntie over, but I've been short of money and I don't have any foundation to stand on. I don't even have the slightest idea on how to bring Auntie over safely. But your actions have solved this problem. Suku said seriously, to you it's just a small effort, but to others it's different. Isn't it a great favor to solve a difficult problem that they have no solution to? Langjun said it yourself. It's not about the weight of the gift, it's about the intention. The two are the same. However, a boss bribing and pacifying his subordinates, closing the distance between them and deepening their relationship. This was originally a beautiful and hazy thing. But his Longjuan's style was different. She asked him directly and he was the person involved. To be honest, it was a little awkward. Suku felt like he had nothing left to live for. Jiang Pingji was not stupid. She understood immediately that she had fallen into the wrong path. She focused on the culture of this era and the so-called bloodline, but she ignored the simplest core. I understand. I was in a dead end. Jiang Pingji nodded seriously. Chapter 183. Jiang Pingji felt as if she had cleared the fog and walked out of a dead end. Many things became clear to her. Of course, there was a huge difference between the two eras, but people's hearts were always the same. She had been stuck in a dead end. While she was thinking, Suku suddenly smiled and dared to tease her. It's rare that there are things that you don't know. Jiang Pingji didn't feel offended at all. After all, no one was perfect. She had many flaws, so there was nothing to deny. No one is omniscient and omnipotent. I don't understand these things and I might even be wrong about them. Isn't that normal? Jiang Pingji looked at Suku with clear eyes and said, let me give you another example. Don't you always study hard just to learn what you don't know? Suku almost choked on his own saliva. How could that be the same? If it weren't for his Longjuan's strong and dazzling performance, as if she was an omniscient and omnipotent person, he wouldn't have teased her like that. However, Jiang Pingji clearly recognized her shortcomings and didn't mind being teased by others. She was rare and that was her biggest advantage. Didn't you see how the most famous prime minister, the teacher of the previous dynasty, was killed by the Gaozong? The prime minister of the previous dynasty just fulfilled his duty and was cruelly killed by the Gaozong's only son. The higher one's position was, the more they couldn't tolerate others looking at their shortcomings. Some people thought it was honest advice, while others thought it was unpleasant to the ear. But no matter which one it was, it varied from person to person. If the lord they served was broad-minded and could accept good advice, of course, they would listen to their subordinates' advice and correct their mistakes. However, if the lord they served was narrow-minded and couldn't bear to hear even half a bad word, even if they didn't flare up on the spot, they would still be harshly remembered by others behind their backs, causing people to feel uneasy. How many loyal subjects and generals would follow such a lord to the death? Therefore, Su Ku was moved by Jiang Pingji's ability to admit that she had her shortcomings so easily. Su Ku was secretly touched, but Jiang Pingji couldn't touch his cute point at all. At that moment, Meng Hun had already settled the rest of his brothers. His face was full of joy. He went to take a look. It was a dry and tidy shared bed. Every bedding was good and warm. He didn't feel the slightest bit cold. Meng Hun was very satisfied with this treatment. There weren't many tenant farmers in the farm, so most of the rooms were empty. Occasionally they would store some things, tidy up a little and smoke out the humidity in the room. Basically, it was ready for people to live in. Su Ku had considered the situation of adding more people to the troop, so he had prepared an extra room which was just in time to be put to use. As for Meng Hun, his residence had already been arranged by the farm's maidservant, so he should have a place to stay at night. Thank you, Lang Jun. Meng Hun bowed to Jiang Pingji as soon as he arrived, but she stopped him before he could kneel down. That's how it should be. Since you've chosen me, I'll at least guarantee you the most basic necessities. Jiang Pingji said calmly and gestured for Meng Hun to sit down. You can ask Xiao Yu about the handover of the troops. I will come to the farm occasionally. If there's any shortage, just let me know. In a few days the situation will be more tense. Remember to be careful. Meng Hun understood what Jiang Pingji meant. If the Mengs knew that Meng Liang had been kidnapped, they would be furious. By the way, after I go back I will send my personal maid to you, Jiang Pingji suddenly said. Su Ku, who was enjoying his tea, almost choked when he heard what Jiang Pingji said. Meng Hun didn't know what to do. His face turned red and white and he stuttered, Langyan, I appreciate your kindness. But my late wife's mourning period is not over yet, so I really can't accept you. Plus, I don't want to remarry. Jiang Pingji was confused. She looked at Meng Hun and then at Su Ku. Then she raised her eyebrows and complained, Why are you so dirty? What kind of dirty things are you thinking about? The two of them didn't understand what dirty was. Su Ku, who was conveniently insulted by Jiang Pingji, also felt wronged. What was wrong with him? Before they could say anything, Jiang Pingji explained, My maid is here to practice martial arts. What else are you thinking? Meng Hun and Su Ku were stunned and then they quietly lowered their heads. Su Ku was fine. He knew that his Lang Jun was not a decent person. But Meng Hun reflected on himself. He had forgotten that his Lang Jun was only 12. According to the rules of the aristocratic families, he didn't even have a room. Meng Hun was a special case of sleeping with women at the age of 11. He couldn't be compared to the other noble sons of the aristocratic families. He thought that his little Lang Jun probably didn't know how misleading his words were. There was a subtle awkwardness between the two of them. Meng Hun coughed awkwardly. He couldn't say that he misunderstood that his Lang Jun wanted to give him his maid. But that didn't make sense. Why would he send his maid to the farm to practice martial arts with the troops? Jiang Pingji had her own plans. She didn't have much time to teach Nongqin. Or rather, she didn't have the patience to teach. She could let Nongqin learn some basic physical training from the troops. Meng Hun was a reliable person. With him watching over her, Nongqin wouldn't be taken advantage of. Jiang Pingji would give Nongqin special training from time to time. Soon she would be able to beat those weak warriors in the troops. Whoever wanted to take advantage of her had to be prepared to be kicked in the balls. My maid likes knives, spears, swords and halberds. It's too boring to be trapped in the inner house all day. I think it's good for her to practice martial arts if she likes it. She won't be bullied by her husband when she gets married, Jiang Pingji said seriously. What do you think? Meng Hun and Su Ku were confused. What could they say? Lang Jun cared about his maidservant and was afraid that she would be bullied when she got married. A normal person would ask someone to instill the correct concept of being a good wife and educating children for the maidservant and let her study women's morality and needlework instead of asking her to practice martial arts. What was he thinking? If there was a conflict in the family, he could solve it with his fists? Su Ku looked like he had opened a door to a new world. Meng Hun said, Lang Jun's idea is great. He was also a man with a daughter who was brutally murdered. If she could grow up safely, it would be time for him to get married in a few years. As a father, of course, he couldn't bear to see his daughter being bullied. So, even though Lang Jun's idea was a bit strange, he still supported it. Suku looked at Meng Hun in shock. He felt like he had been rejected by the two. But Suku twisted his body uneasily and said, "This is not a good idea. After all, the troops are all men. What should we do if the reputation of Longjuan's maid is ruined?" Jiang Pingji didn't say anything. Meng Hun said with a stern face, "In the previous dynasty there were also female generals. Why can't women practice martial arts?" Suku was speechless. Chapter 184. Although that was what Meng Hun said, he still felt uneasy. He felt that something bad would happen. According to his understanding, the personal maids of the noble sons of the aristocratic families would either get married when they were of age, or they would directly become servants in the house. It was extremely rare to see someone like Jiang Pingji who directly threw her out to practice martial arts. Perhaps it was the only one. Lang Jun was still young and didn't know much about romance, so he didn't mind letting the maid learn martial arts. What if she grew up and regretted it? Meng Hun hesitated to express his concern, but he found out that Lang Jun was not ignorant at all. Not only did he understand, but he was also shrewd. His thoughts were different from other men and he was more broad-minded. "Don't worry. I plan to let the maid learn martial arts. You don't have to be so nervous." Jiang Pingji shook her head and began to put on a bluffing air. It was difficult for the people of this era to understand her thoughts and persistence, so she planned to use a way that the people of this era could understand to explain her thoughts. Moreover, her fallacious reasoning could convince people. She said, "I often read the books of the predecessors and read the history books. I found a very interesting phenomenon." Suku was interested when she mentioned the history books. He asked, "Lang Jun, what did you find?" Jiang Pingji said, "Most women were vassals or even goods that could be bought and sold. This phenomenon was especially serious before the chaos of the 16 kingdoms. The emperor of a country had as many as 33,000 concubines and maids. Although it was an exaggeration, it showed how extravagant the emperor was at that time. On the other hand, men could not marry. In some places, brothers, uncles and nephews even shared wives. It became a custom." Suku nodded. The books he read were all from the study of the Lus, so he had naturally read the content. Later, the last emperor favored the villains. He was extravagant and drained the national treasury. The 16 vassal kings occupied land and proclaimed themselves emperors. That was the beginning of the chaos of the 16 kingdoms for hundreds of years. At that time, women were robbed. During the famine, they even ate them. Suku had also read about this history. At that time, he felt that the era of the 16 kingdoms was too bloody and dark. The central plains were empty, and the population was less than a tenth of what it had been before the 16 kingdoms. It was so ignorant and bloody that it made one's blood boil. The poison caused by the 16 kingdoms did not return to the previous population level until decades after the founding of the Xia kingdom. Most of those famous female generals appear at this time. Jiang Pingji said, "Is there value only in giving birth to children, contributing to the population, or becoming food for others?" "But I see something different." Suku shook his head and denied, "Of course not. Women have contributed a lot to the increase of the population. Is that all?" Jiang Pingji continued, "The 16 kingdoms were established one after another. In the 6th year, bandits burned, killed and looted in Yushin County. Nua Changpu used a stratagem to kill the leader of the bandits and gather the remaining bandits, protecting the peace of the area. Her only value was to give birth." Suku thought for a moment and shook his head. According to the records, Changpu is a natural stone maiden and cannot bear children. However, she has a husband and they love each other very much. There's a strange record in the Xia kingdom. There was a strange phenomenon of a golden phoenix descending to the ground in the sky of Mei County. At the same time, a baby girl was born. Everyone said that the baby girl had the name of the golden phoenix and could be the mother of the country. "Xiaoyu, do you still remember the content of this record?" Jiang Pingji asked again. What she said was all true history. Anyone with a bit of knowledge would understand. "Lang Jun, you must be talking about one of the meritorious deeds in the founding of the Xia kingdom. She was as famous as Master Meng, and she was later bestowed the title of Marquis Su." Then Jiang Pingji mentioned a few other famous women in the 16 kingdoms or in the early days of the Xia kingdom. Finally, she said, "From this, it can be seen that women can also create meritorious deeds that are not inferior to men." So why is the position of women getting closer and closer to that of the 16 kingdoms? I heard from the merchants that Xianxia is now promoting a book called Women's Precepts. There are 7 chapters in it, including inferiority, husband and wife, respect and prudence, women's conduct, concentration, obedience, and uncle and sister. The content is quite interesting. Xiao, you can read it. Suku was speechless. Women's Precepts. It sounded like it was read by women. Why should he read it? I bought a copy of Women's Precepts from a merchant. When I finished reading it, there was only one thought in my mind. Which idiot wrote this? Jiang Pingji sneered and said, after careful investigation, it turned out that it was written by the Empress of Zhongzhou with the intention of enlightening the women of the world. There were even Confucian scholars who wrote that Master Su's behavior was immoral and hoped that the title of Marquis Su would be revoked. When Suku heard that, he almost exploded. He said, "What a pedantic scholar. How dare he do that? Master Su's bravery is no less than Master Meng of Tsangzhou. If it weren't for the fact that Master Su has few children and doesn't like disputes in the court, the Mengs of Tsangzhou wouldn't be so arrogant today." Meng Hun's old boss was the Mengs. He was a little embarrassed when he heard that. Master Meng and Master Su were known as the 2 heroes of the army in those days. They were later part of the 5 generals. However, Master Meng loved wine. He drank during a march and almost got into trouble. In the end, it was Master Su who led the army to rescue them and prevented any losses. Therefore, the person who was most displeased with the Mengs was Master Su, who was given the posthumous title of Marquis Su. The posthumous title should have been given to him when he was alive, but Emperor Xia delayed it until he passed away because of the atmosphere in the court and Meng Jing's reputation. But in Zhongzhou, there are many scholars who approve of this news. Jiang Pingji smiled with a touch of cynicism. What does this mean? She is a founding member of the country. Because of her identity as a woman, she fought in battles all her life and made countless contributions. She couldn't be conferred the title of Marquis when she was alive, and the posthumous title was taken away by her descendants after her death. With the current atmosphere, are we moving forward and becoming more open-minded, or are we moving closer to the end of the dynasty before the 16 kingdoms? Suku calmed himself down. Thinking about it carefully, it seemed to be the case all these years. Even Dongqing, which was quite open-minded, had gradually become reserved. Was this a kind of progress or a kind of regression? Suku asked. So what do you mean? Nongqing's arrangement is my intention, Jiang Pingji said. After the establishment of the Xia dynasty, the people's livelihood and population have indeed recovered a lot. However, after the 5 kingdoms divided into Xia, there were constant conflicts between the kingdoms. The population that had just started to improve showed signs of withering again. It was already like this, yet the Queen of Zhongzhou still came up with the so-called women's precepts, which required women to be faithful to one man and not marry a second husband. It would be a miracle if the population increased, but the people of Zhongzhou were also brainless. They actually thought that it was very reasonable. Later on, they asked the women in their families to study the women's precepts written by the queen. Had their brains been digested into sh*t? Wasn't the correct way to cultivate the people's health, encourage farming, urge men and women to marry, and issue appropriate laws to support it? If this kind of brain could become the emperor, the *king system still wanted her to fight in the palace to win the favor of this kind of person. She must be brainless. The innocent system. Chapter 185. Suku sighed. Dongqing also had a post-war recovery law, but some aristocratic families exploited and obstructed it, so it could not be implemented. Now there were still conflicts between the countries. The southern man and the northern borderline were eyeing each other covetously. The war was almost on the verge of breaking out. All the knowledgeable people in the world had a consensus that the world was going to be in chaos again after a few years of stability. Thinking about the history of the 16 countries and looking at the 5 countries that were not giving in to each other, Suku felt more and more helpless. People were like duckweed, drifting without anyone to rely on. The clear voice of the young man continued to ring in his ears, as if it had a strange charm that calmed people's hearts and souls. Young strong men died on the battlefield. If the remaining women don't have the ability to protect themselves, they will be taken back by the northern borderline and the southern man and suffer all kinds of humiliation. If they don't have children continuously, They will be treated as two-legged sheep by the livestock and be killed when they are hungry. Langan, you mean? Although Suku was a man, he had longed for those extraordinary women in the previous dynasty for a long time and admired them wholeheartedly. Because of his admiration, it even affected his choice of future wife. His mother also had a great influence on him. She was a strong woman. Even if she lost her husband at a young age, she could still grit her teeth and raise Suku. She taught him how to be a man and provided for him to study. She was like the most common weed that would not be easily subdued despite the wind and rain and trampled on by pedestrians. He didn't dare to imagine that if he married a weak and graceful woman, who was docile and beautiful, who also cried in the wind and screamed when she saw snakes, insects, rats and ants, then when something happened to him, who would his wife and children rely on? Who else could they rely on? It was precisely because of this that Suku agreed with what Jiang Pingji said, even if it was a little off the mark. Suku vaguely understood and felt that this person really had the look of a wise ruler. However, he soon found out that it was all a lie. Women can also make such achievements. Why do they have to be tied up like canaries? Their wings can't fly and they can only be used as decorations? Other than being admired, being a part of your wealth, giving birth to children, supporting your husband and children, there's no other value? Meng Hun did not interrupt, but he also shook his head in denial. Everyone had a daughter. If they gave birth to a daughter and raised her painstakingly, only to have her become a servant to another man, who could bear it? Meng Hun said, as a father, I naturally don't like my own flesh and blood being treated so lowly. Suku was still a fledgling, but when he imagined his future he found it hard to accept. A husband and a father were two completely different identities. Naturally, their perspectives were different. I don't think that's the point. The point is, it's such a waste of manpower and resources. Not only did they cripple him, but they also wasted his excellent combat strength. Women had the same battle prowess as men, so why did men have to go to war while women stayed at home? Why don't we go together? Suku and Meng Hun were speechless. They were dumbfounded. This was different from the usual way of stirring up love. So, from the beginning to the end she had said so much, laid so much groundwork just to say that women should stay at home and not go to the battlefield to waste their strength? This was the real deal, using women as men, right? Meng Hun coughed and tried to say something to ease the awkward atmosphere. Langjun is still young. There are many things you don't understand. He smiled. Suku immediately understood and turned her head away, unable to bear to look at him. Tell me, what do I not understand? Jiang Pingji felt that if they did not follow her script, she would be very embarrassed. Women, the reason why there are more women in the inner courtyard is that they, are born different from men. Meng Hun said vaguely. How could he explain to his little Langjun that women's physiology was different from men's? After their bodies matured, they would need kuei water every month and their bodies would become delicate. Pregnancy would take more than 9 months and they would not be able to work normally. Even giving birth would be like walking through the gates of hell. Langjun was still young and inexperienced. Even if he explained it to him, he might not understand. That was a bit embarrassing. Meng Hun glanced at Suku. You are a scholar after all, so you should say something. Unfortunately, Suku was already looking at the sky and the earth and he refused to look at his pleading eyes. Jiang Pingji was speechless. The two men thought that Jiang Pingji did not understand, but in fact she already knew what they were trying to express through their mysterious eye contact. Because of the physiological structure, men were destined to be external while women were internal. With the development of society, the social status of the latter would get lower and lower. If these words were said to people in ancient times, it would indeed be the case. But it did not make sense in front of Jiang Pingji. There is nothing in this world that is impossible. Jiang Pingji curled her lips mysteriously and said that out of the blue. Suku and Meng Hun stopped eye contact and looked at her. They did not know what she meant. Jiang Pingji obviously did not want to explain. We're going off topic. Anyway, Nongqin will be training with the troops in the farm. As for training tasks, you don't have to deliberately give her preferential treatment, and you don't have to relax the standards. Just do what you need to do. When the training is almost done, I will make other arrangements. Jiang Pingji didn't believe that they would lose to a group of weak fighters. She taught them with special attention. Meng Hun nodded, but he still wanted to protect her a little bit. After all, girls were different from rough men. That is not a problem. It is also a good thing that Long Juan's maidservant wants to learn martial arts. At least she can protect Lang Jun. But they are rough people and sometimes their mouths are not clean. They are wronged. Meng Hun did not dare to say that he could completely avoid it. Jiang Pingji said indifferently, "It's okay. If someone says something dirty, Nongqin will just break a few of their teeth. If they could fight, they would use their fists to reason." Meng Hun was speechless. If his subordinates had such violent thoughts, Meng Hun would definitely say something. But the one who said it was Lang Jun, so he, up to you, up to you, up to you. After Meng Hun left to prepare, Suka suddenly thought of something and asked her a question. "Lang Jun, you want women to go to the battlefield just because you think it is a waste of combat power?" He deliberately emphasized the word, just. Jiang Pingji suddenly smiled slyly and said, "Xiaoyu knows me well." Suka was speechless. He suddenly did not want to listen to what Jiang Pingji had to say next. He was afraid that it would shock him. But it was too late. The world values boys more than girls. Many families abandon their daughters and let them be taken away by wolves and tigers. Even if the children grow up, most of them are treated harshly. If the men in the family need money to get married or build a house, most of them will sell the girls cheaply. Suku felt that he did not need to listen anymore. Jiang Pingji wanted him to hear it. With the same amount of silver, one strong man can buy 2 girls and even have extra. Most importantly, it was cheap. She could build 2 troops with the same amount of silver. Suku was speechless. Just as he expected. Chapter 186. These are all written by Lang Jun. I didn't expect Lang Jun to be so knowledgeable about troop training. Meng Hun held the training rules written by Jiang Pingji like a treasure. Suku was not used to Meng Hun's expression of admiration, so he gave him the original draft that Jiang Pingji had written before. The training content could be called torture by Suku. Naturally, it was inhumane. Meng Hun glanced at it and put it down quietly. He would rather read the revised version. "Coach Meng, if there's anything you don't understand, you can come to me at any time." Meng Hun was a tactful person. Suku handed over the work easily, so the mental preparation he had done before was not put to use. "Of course. I'll have to trouble Xiaoyu when the time comes." Meng Hun cupped his hands and smiled. He liked Suku a little more. Civil and military were 2 different fields. As a scholar, Suku was not familiar with training, but he was very meticulous in his work. Even though Meng Hun had never been in contact with this fledgling troop before, he had a rough idea after reading the content that Suku gave him. They were in the same camp, but they were not familiar with each other, so they did not talk about anything other than work. Suku was young, but he was talented and had a high level of comprehension. He learned a lot from Meng Hun's conversation. He was good at internal affairs, so he specialized in that area. He was very interested in the wartime food transportation that Meng Hun mentioned. As the saying goes, before the troops move, the food and fodder move first. A good logistics transportation line could decide the outcome of a war. His Longjuan's ambition was not limited to that. As the first member of Jiang Pingji's team, Suku could not lock his position as an accountant in the Luz. In other words, Suku had his own ambitions. They weren't small. At least he wasn't just an accountant. Meng Hun did not hide anything since Suku was asking about it. He told him everything he knew and even the names of several books. As for how to find those books, it was not Meng Hun's concern. Of course, Meng Hun did not read as many books as Suku. He had the advantage of age and his own experience, which was valuable. Unknowingly, the 2 of them chatted until night fell. After a hasty dinner, they went back to work. Jiang Pingji went back to the Luz and took out her night clothes. Then she put the 2 books in a secret place in the woodshed. "That's good," she smiled. Everything was under control, which made her mood improve a lot. Her figure quickly disappeared into the night. That night, the gambling house was still very noisy. The gamblers did not care about the loss. They only cared about their own money and the money in other people's pockets. The boss of the gambling house was so angry that he almost vomited blood after Jiang Pingji cheated him of more than 4,000 taels of silver. Later on, he received news that the beautiful woman in the woodshed had been kidnapped by an unknown person. The hired thugs who were on duty at the gambling house had been seriously injured. When the old man heard this, he almost couldn't breathe. However, he had a tough life and was still alive. Even though he had suffered 2 critical hits, the boss would not close down because of this. This business, of course, had to continue. This casino was his property in Hejin County. If it was closed, how much silver would he lose in a day? The boss's face was ashen as he swallowed the blood and broken teeth. He hired a doctor to treat the injured thugs and bought some medicine. After giving them a small sum of money, he sent them home to recuperate. The security of the casino was temporarily handed over to the thugs who were not on duty that day. Big, 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 big. Small, 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 small. This time it must be small. Voices rose and fell one after another, filling the lobby on the first floor of the gambling house. The banker was smiling on the surface, but he was nervous on the inside. He opened the dice cup. 3 sixes. It was still a leopard. The dealer was a killer. At that moment, many gamblers who had lost their minds started to complain that there was a shady deal going on in the gambling house. Why is it a leopard again? This is the 3rd leopard tonight, right? I have lost 20 taels since I came in. The last one was 3. 1 and now it's 3. 6. Who would believe that there is no shady deal? That's right. The money I earned from selling 2 acres of land has been taken away. Faced with the ruckus of the gamblers, the banker sneered coldly in his heart. A bunch of fools. The gambling house was a place where gamblers were emptying their pockets. How could there be no shady deal going on? How could the dealer have won so many times without any shady deal? Weren't they stupid? The dealer saw that the gamblers were getting out of control. Some thugs came forward with sticks and threatened them. The hot-headed gamblers became as obedient as a quail. How could an ordinary person beat a thug with a thick stick with his bare hands? The dealer said calmly, "If you are unlucky, go pray to the god of fortune. If you lose, it's your bad luck. Don't blame the gambling house. What kind of place do you think the gambling house is? If you win, you lose. If you don't win, you have to be arrogant, right?" In fact, the dealer was also in a dilemma. He had lost too much money and no one was making money. Even the stupidest gamblers would be vigilant. But what could he do? The gambling house had been cheated of so much money. The boss naturally continued to exploit the gamblers. In the past, he only occasionally pulled wool. Now he planned to shave all the wool off the fat sheep. If you want to gamble, go. If not, get lost. The dealer waved his hand in annoyance. The gamblers looked at each other. In the end, no one left. They continued to hold on to the idea that they could make a comeback in the next round and earn back the money they had lost. They continued to indulge in this cruel trap. The dealer saw that they had surrounded the gambling table again. He snorted coldly in his heart. Despicable. The gambling house was still noisy and lively. The roars were mixed with the ecstasy of making money. It continued until dawn. Early in the morning, the leaves of grass were covered with mist. The city gates had not opened. Many people had gathered outside the city. Many of them had brought the vegetables they had harvested from their fields. With a creak, the city gates opened. The people began to line up and enter the city one by one. Thump, thump, thump. The crisp sound of horse hooves came from afar. The people at the end of the line were carefully counting the eggs in their baskets. These were laid by their big hen. They had saved up for a few days to gather these few catties. They were waiting to sell them at a good price at the market to subsidize their family. Get out of the way. The people had already moved aside when they heard the horse hooves. However, they did not expect the other party to be so arrogant. They did not stop at all. Ah! Help! My eggs! My eggs! Who stepped on me? It hurts, ouch! Chapter 187. Those who were lucky enough to escape fell to the ground, while the unlucky ones were trampled by the hooves of the horses. Immediately, a middle-aged woman was trampled on the left side of her chest. After the sound of bones breaking, her chest caved in. Blood flowed from her mouth and she died. The guards at the gate noticed the commotion and stepped forward to stop it. The 20 or 30 strong men on horseback took out a token from their waists. Who dares to stop the Mengs? Let them in. Hey, they were so stubborn. The guards had seen arrogant people, but they had never seen anyone who dared to kill people on horseback and still dared to announce their family name. Even if they were from the aristocratic families, they still cared about their face. How could they be so arrogant and rude? Stop them. Stop them all. The head of the guards was unhappy. This kind of thing had happened so early in the morning and several lives had been lost. If he let the murderer go just like that, he would be charged with a crime and he would not be able to keep his position. I have never heard of anyone with the surname Meng in Hejian County. Arrest them. However, before the guards got close, the one who had trampled people to death on horseback blinded the guard with a whip. I am from the Mengs in Meng County, Zhangzhou. How dare you? The Mengs? The Mengs, one of the 4 noble families in Dongqing and the real emperor of Zhangzhou? The leader of the guard's expression changed several times. Finally, he forced a smile. Oh, I understand. May I know the reason why you have come? Breaking into the gate and trampling people to death? Did they really think that Hejian County was the same as Meng County in Zhangzhou? Cut the crap and let us into the city. Otherwise we will kill you. The whip in his hand cracked in the air, forcing the leader of the guards to take a step back. Just like that, the group of people casually rode their horses away. Above the gate, the soldiers had already drawn their bows and arrows, waiting for the order to shoot. The leader of the guards was livid. He raised his hand to stop them. If they were really from the Mengs, they would be in trouble if they hurt them. If they were not from the Mengs, they wouldn't dare to be so arrogant in Hejian County. However, they still had to send someone to follow them. Who knew what they were up to? Facing the people lying in pools of blood and hearing the moaning and groaning in his ears, the leader clenched his fists and punched the city wall in anger. Report this matter to the prefectural governor, then send the injured to the medical center. Record everyone's loss and those who died tragically. Send these to the prefectural governor and let him decide. The Meng family of Zhangzhou, they've gone too far. Early in the morning, there were already wails and cries outside the city gate. Back to the other side. After the group entered the city, they immediately galloped on the streets. Fortunately, the market had not opened yet and there were not many pedestrians, so it was easy to avoid them. Do you know where the Fulai Casino is? The leader stopped his horse in front of a passerby who obviously hadn't slept all night. The horse's hooves were raised high and almost fell on the man. The man was so scared that he was no longer sleepy. He felt as if he had taken a stroll through the gates of hell. His back was drenched in cold sweat. I know. Under the threat of the horse's hooves, the passerby was so scared that he fell to the ground. The passerby was the gambler who had gambled all night in the Fulai Casino. His eyes were bloodshot, his face was pale, his lips were pale and his eyes were heavy. From afar he looked like he was walking on air. You know? Good that you know. Take us there quickly or you'll be whipped. The leader was overjoyed, and the dozens of strong men behind him also revealed relaxed expressions. They didn't expect to be so lucky that they caught a person just after they entered the city gate, and he happened to know the Fulai Casino. Thinking of Meng Liang, who had been missing for a long time, they couldn't help but feel nervous. They didn't want to escort him to Shangjing to hide. After all, Meng Liang's bad temper was well known. He was also a little lecher. Anyone who was targeted by him, no matter male or female, no matter how good-looking they were, could escape from his claws. The lucky ones survived and the unlucky ones were beaten to death directly. Thinking that the family head, Meng Zhan, wanted him to be the heir of the family, many elders in the family felt a little disappointed. The Mengs was so glorious. If it was handed over to a playboy like Meng Liang, wouldn't it be over? How could he support a family with his little ability? In contrast, the eldest Lang Jun, who had no sense of existence, was more popular. Unfortunately, he was far away in Shangjing to study, and he wouldn't come back even once a year. He had almost no contact with the Meng's subordinates, and he didn't even write a letter to his family. Thinking of this, people could understand. Meng Liang had a son who didn't even have a son. How could he be more likable than Meng Liang, who was sweet and filial? However, it was strange that they were both sons of the same mother. The second Lang Jun, Meng Liang, was useless, while the eldest Lang Jun, Meng Hing, was educated and polite. It was said that he was quite famous in Shangjing. He was going to be evaluated this year, and it was estimated that he would get a good result. Putting away the unnecessary thoughts, the leader threatened the gambler to lead the way. The gambler had no choice but to lead the way in fear. The knife on the man's waist was real, and the whip in his hand was still dripping with blood. He didn't want to die. Is this the place? After several turns, the group stopped in front of a gambling house. Standing outside, they could hear the clamor inside the house. Yes. There is only one gambling house here called Fu Lai. Well, sir, can I go now? If he led the way for others, he could get some tips if he was lucky. But he was leading the way for this man, and it was good enough that he didn't lose his life. The gambler bowed. After getting permission from the leader, he quickly turned around and ran away as if he was being chased by evil spirits. Bah, coward. Behind him, a few of the attendants on horseback laughed, mocking the gambler's horrified expression and actions just now. Shut up. It's more important to find Lang Jun. The leader scolded in a low voice, got off the horse, opened the curtain and entered the gambling house with his knife. There were about 20 or 30 people in the gambling house, all with knives. They were tall and burly and had a strong aura. They seemed to be evil. As soon as they entered the hall of the gambling house, the whole space became narrower than before. The sharp-eyed waiter of the gambling house saw them and his heart skipped a beat. Judging from their clothes and aura, they didn't look like they were here for fun. Could it be that they were in trouble? Thinking of this, the waiter had cold sweat on his back. He forced a smile and went forward to welcome the guests. Don't talk nonsense. Let me ask you, did you catch a young boy 2 days ago? The waiter's expression froze and his forehead began to sweat. Chapter 188. Don't play tricks with me. Speak. Did you catch a very good-looking young boy here? The leader was experienced and knowledgeable. How could the waiter's thoughts escape his eyes? He immediately brandished his whip to demonstrate his power. With a loud crack, the sturdy gambling table broke into pieces. The gambler who could not dodge in time was whipped. In the next second, a frightening line of blood seeped through his clothes, scaring everyone away. There was only a broken gambling table left on the ground, and a gambler who was holding his waist, blood oozing out from between his fingers. If you don't tell the truth, I'll let you all have a taste of being whipped later. Let me ask you one more time. Did your gambling house capture a very good-looking young man a few days ago? Speak, did you catch him? The whip in the man's hand was extremely thick, about the thickness of 2 fingers of an adult. There were many fine and dense barbs on the long black whip. The tail of the whip was strung with more than 20 thin blades. With this kind of whip, it did not require much strength to whip someone until they bled profusely. If one used more strength, they might not even be able to withstand a single whip and directly die. The waiter was relatively close to the leader, so he could clearly see the blood dripping from the barbs on the whip. He was immediately scared out of his wits. This little one. The waiter originally wanted to be stubborn, but when his eyes met with the leader's, a kind of illusion of death assaulted him, as if his neck was being strangled by an invisible force, causing him to be unable to say the rest of the words. The other gamblers did not know what had happened, but they knew that the gambling house was probably in big trouble. They wanted to sneak away, but the leader's entourage blocked the door, looking as if they would not let him go until they got an answer. The waiter was unwilling to speak, but the other gamblers felt pity for their lives, so they naturally opened their mouths. 2 days ago we did catch such a young boy. I heard that the boy is extremely beautiful as a fairy. His skin is exquisite and his taste is also. The gambler was the first to speak, but before he could finish his words he was already covered by the person beside him. The entire lobby was silent. Everyone could feel an invisible chilling atmosphere enveloping the entire place. Those gamblers were all ordinary people and their bodies were even weaker than ordinary people. When had they ever faced such a murderous aura? He was so scared that his legs started to tremble. His knees went soft and he knelt on the ground with a plop. He didn't feel any pain in his knees at all. What they didn't know was that the leader and his followers were also extremely shocked at this moment. They were so shocked that they forgot how to react. They were all adult men who had experienced sex and played with women before. Perhaps some of them had even played with men before. As for what the gambler had described, they knew very well in their hearts what kind of scene would happen. At this moment there was only one thought in everyone's mind. It's over. It was indeed over. Who was Meng Liang? The Zhongzi that Meng Zhan favored, the future leader of the Meng family, was now in a gambling house. It was so embarrassing. The leader's expression was incomparably gloomy, even turning ashen. He didn't dare to think about the storm they would have to face after rescuing Meng Liang. The waiter also wanted to cry but had no tears. He had already realized that the kid he had caught earlier really had a powerful background. Now that they had come to ask for Meng Liang, it was obvious that he was a tough guy. How could a small gambling house resist them? The waiter said shakily. He really isn't here. He was released a long time ago. How could the leader believe that? He would rather believe that these people had evil thoughts about Meng Liang and locked him up in a small dark room. He waved his hand, and the 20 to 30 followers he had brought with him guarded all the entrances and exits of the gambling house, not allowing anyone to escape. Search. The order was given and the demolition. No, the search began. The leader was like a stone pillar standing where he was. He crossed his arms in front of his chest and his resolute face was solemn. The waiter wanted to cry but had no tears. The other thugs received the news and wanted to come up with wooden sticks. One of the followers pulled out a knife from his waist. Blood splashed, staining the gambling table and the scattered silver and gambling equipment. Everyone watched as the thug's arm was chopped off, and then the knife pierced through his chest. He fell to the ground with his eyes wide open in horror. Someone was dead. Blood quickly spread and filled the entire hall. The timid gamblers covered their mouths and vomited. The brave ones also turned pale like a white wall covered with a layer of lime. Although the thugs in the gambling house were used to doing heartless things, they still knew fear. They only dared to seriously injure people, but they didn't dare to kill them. However, none of them expected that there was no lack of people like this in this world. The knives on their waists were all genuine and could take a person's life. The wait was especially long. One by one, the followers came up with a pale face, but none of them could find Meng Liang. Sir, our restaurant was indeed blind and caught that young man, but that very night that young man had already been rescued. The waiter was trembling with fear and his 2 skinny legs couldn't stop trembling. He didn't dare to tell the truth. If he told the truth and said that the young man disappeared on the second night after being caught, it would undoubtedly confirm the truth that the big mouth of the gambler had revealed. Could any aristocratic family endure such humiliation? If that happened, they would really be finished. Therefore, there were some things that they couldn't admit even if they were beaten to death. After a while, the followers came back one after another. The news was very disappointing. The last one was holding 2 scrolls in his hands. The scrolls were stained with dust. These 2 scrolls were found in a woodshed. Found this. Boss, please take a look. He had interrogated 2 of the thugs and confirmed that the woodshed was where the gambling house kept the goods. Because he didn't dare to make a decision, he didn't open the scrolls to see the contents. The leader reached out his hand and roughly tore the neatly tied strips of cloth on the bamboo scrolls. He shook it open with one hand. He read 10 lines at a time. After he finished reading, the leader's face suddenly became darker and darker, as if ink was about to drip out. Everyone was trembling, afraid that it would say that Meng Liang was already dead. Of course, there was no such content, but it wasn't optimistic either. These people. Kill them all. The leader's eyes flashed and his murderous aura was obvious. After receiving the order, the other followers didn't hesitate. They all pulled out the knives on their waists and walked to the others. What were these people going to do? Whether it was the people in the gambling house or the gamblers, they were all scared out of their wits. Murder. One of the gamblers couldn't help it anymore. He wanted to run out the door, but his head was instantly cut off from his body. Blood splashed on the wall. At that moment, everyone clearly realized one thing. Chapter 189. What's going on? Jiang Pingji had just finished her breakfast. She meditated for a while and then turned on the streaming room. She greeted the audience as usual. On the way to the study room, she saw 2 servants whispering to each other by the rockery. One of them was crying and looked very sad. Her 5 senses were very good, but they were also troublesome. To deal with this flaw, Jiang Pingji would usually suppress her 5 senses to keep them at half the level of ordinary people. She was a bit far away, so she only heard some words like, city gate, someone died, and someone was injured. The servants were all panicked when they saw Jiang Pingji. It was still working time, so how could they not be flustered when they were caught slacking? The Lu's had its own rules and regulations. After County Chief Lu came back, he became more strict and did not allow anyone to slack off. Don't be so flustered. Tell me what happened at the city gate. Jiang Pingji faced the middle-aged woman who had been crying secretly. I'm not an unreasonable person. I won't blame you if you have a reason for chatting. The middle-aged woman grabbed her sleeves nervously and said sadly, This morning my mother and father entered the city together. We didn't expect a group of strong men who claimed to be from the Mengs of Zhangzhou to break in. They rode their horses and injured people. My father tried to protect my mother and one of his legs was trampled by a horse. Jiang Pingji's face turned serious and the audience in the streaming room expressed their shock. Mingyue Tianya. Oh my god, did I hear it wrong? Armstrong. Why do I feel that all the people and things that the streamer has been in contact with recently are related to the Mengs? Yeqing Zhou. The Mengs are too arrogant. They even dared to break into the city gate. Do they want to die? Since your father was injured, I guess you must be anxious now and have no mood to work. Go to the cashier and get an extra month's salary to buy some nourishing tonics for your father. He is old and will not recover as quickly as young people. The servant heard that and suddenly burst into tears. She thanked Jiang Pingji repeatedly. After she left, Jiang Pingji looked at another servant who came to deliver a message. Her eyes turned cold. Come here and tell me what happened at the city gate this morning. Be as specific as possible. Jiang Pingji had expected Meng Liang's entourage to come, but she didn't expect them to come so quickly and so arrogantly. They even let their horses hurt people and it seemed like they even killed them. It was a servant woman who came to deliver the news. She was a servant of the Lu residence, but she didn't live in the Lu residence. She usually worked in a secluded area in the outer yard and was very idle. After she was done with her own work, she still had time to gossip about the rumors in the marketplace. She could be considered the gossip center of the entire Lu residence. Although she wasn't present as a gossip girl, her storytelling skills were quite good. She narrated it vividly. Are you sure someone died? Jiang Pingji asked. Her eyes flashed with a hint of murderous intent. Her impression of the Mengs dropped by half. The servant woman gestured with her hands and said, That's right. There were more than a few who were trampled to death by the horses' hooves. There was also a beautiful girl who was of marriageable age and followed her mother into the city to buy some red hair ropes. Who would have thought that this would happen? Everyone says that the man surnamed Meng is the local tyrant of Zhangzhou. He can't even control the current officials. Now that I see it, it's true. Jiang Pingji glared at her coldly and said, How dare you say something like that? Don't take your life. The maidservant came back to her senses and immediately broke out in a cold sweat. She quickly bent down and begged for mercy. It's good that you have a long memory. Trouble comes from the mouth. It doesn't matter if you die or not, but don't drag the entire Lu residence into it. Jiang Pingji waved her hand and gestured for her to leave. Since there's a reason for this, I won't make trouble for you this time. Don't leave your post without permission in the future. The bullet screen in the livestream room flashed past her eyes one after another. Some of them were like ha ha ha, while others were like, oh. Raising a chestnut. The host's behavior is typical. Only the officials are allowed to set fires, but the common people are not allowed to light lamps. I remember that she named the royal family of Dongqing by name. When the servant said so, she scolded her with a straight face, hoping that the maidservant would be traumatized. Raising a chestnut. If not, how can she be a match for the domineering host? Raising two chestnuts. The only host who is domineering and capricious but still not pleasing to the eye. Tang roasted chestnut. No. Now isn't the point that the Mengs are arrogant? They broke the city gate with horses and killed people? Obviously there were viewers who were willing to understand the plot of the livestream, but only a few. Most of them were there to watch the host. The Mengs. Jiang Pingji could imagine the bloody chaos at the city gate in the early morning just by simulating it in her mind. In the future, the first ones to be destroyed will be the Mengs. She suddenly opened her eyes, turned around and left the Lu residence. She got on the carriage and asked the groom to drive her to Fulai gambling house. Before he could even get close, the stench of blood had already entered his nose. Everyone's blood was slightly different. People with a keen sense of smell could even distinguish a lot of information by smell, such as how many people had died and how long they had been dead. That was her level in her previous life. In this life she had only fused a little, so she was not that good. However, based on her rich experience, the number of people who had died was definitely not less than 50. Jiang Pingji's face turned cold. She said to the groom, Go a little further and see what happened. The coachman drove the carriage forward a little. A group of people surrounded the entrance of the gambling house. One by one, people dressed in bailiffs' uniforms carried out the corpses covered with white cloth. The blood had yet to coagulate and it dripped onto the ground. Everyone's faces turned pale when they saw it. They were all killed. Jiang Pingji clenched her fists. At that moment her expression was unprecedentedly cold. The system which was one with her wanted to reduce its sense of existence to zero, for fear that Jiang Pingji would think of it. No, I really can't stand the angry aura of the host. The almost stagnant atmosphere did not last long. Jiang Pingji loosened her fists and opened her eyes, which were clear and bright again. Go and ask them what exactly happened. The coachman got off the carriage and asked. Jiang Pingji lifted the curtain. The bailiffs inside were still moving the corpses. One of them was carrying a large bag of bloody things. Fresh blood stained the coarse cloth and dripped down continuously. The bag contained the broken limbs of other corpses. Jiang Pingji was shocked. Actually, Jiang Pingji did not need the groom to ask. She could piece together a complete picture based on the discussions of the onlookers. A group of strong men in armor with big knives at their waists and long whips in their hands entered the gambling house. Not long after, the people inside were all dead. Hey, you mean the killers in the group at the city gate? Are they in cahoots? Someone said mysteriously. He did not dare to raise his voice for fear of being targeted by the group of killers. They must be in cahoots. Someone saw them break through the city gate and go straight to this gambling house. A life for a life. These executioners should be executed. Chapter 190. Second Langjun, I've asked. The coachman came back and whispered to Jiang Pingji through the curtain to make sure she could hear him. After a while, Jiang Pingji asked, is there any sign of the Lu's residence in the carriage today? The coachman was stunned for a moment and then he answered, Langjun, how can I disobey your orders? Although he did not know why his Langjun suddenly requested not to take any carriages with the Lu's logo. The Lu's were not poor. They had a few carriages for all kinds of banquets and trips. Jiang Pingji closed her eyes and said to the coachman, drive the carriage to Shi City first. Okay. The coachman whipped the horse and it moved gently, bypassed the crowd and went to Shi City. After Jiang Pingji left, there were a few strong men sitting on the second floor of the tea house opposite. The tea on the table was cold and there was no trace of it being touched. They stared at the gambling house opposite them. They had been waiting for a long time and there was nothing special. They were the Meng's entourage and they were there to protect Meng Liang on his way to Shangjing. The person who was being protected like the moon was the leader. The man's eyes were fixed on a carriage that was moving away, and his eyes were filled with doubt. He called the waiter over and pointed at the carriage that was not far away. Do you know which family it belongs to? The waiter stretched his neck awkwardly. He tried to identify it for a long time, but he could not think of any familiar family. It was a very ordinary carriage. The workmanship and materials were common, and even a rich family could afford it. The waiter was confused. Didn't ordinary carriages look like this? There was no family emblem on it, so who could recognize it? Hejin was not a big place, but it was not small either. Those who could afford to take a carriage were as bright as the stars in the sky. He was just a waiter. It was good enough that he could recognize most of the family emblems of the gentry families. It was too difficult for him to recognize the carriage. He laughed awkwardly and said, Sir, you are making things difficult for me. It is just an ordinary carriage. 9 out of 10 carriages in Hejian look like this. I really can't recognize which family it belongs to. At that moment, the group of people had taken off their armors. They did not recognize them for the time being. Leader, what do we do now? The leader did not speak, but his mind was still wandering. He raised his hand and asked one of his attendants to follow the carriage quietly to see which family it belonged to. He didn't know why, but he felt that something was strange. Most people wouldn't want to go near a place where a murder happened, except for those ignorant people who were not afraid of death. Was it not bad luck to die? Not to mention these families who could afford to ride in carriages. However, the leader had no choice but to give up when the attendant came back and reported to Jiang Pingji about the carriage. Leader, I don't think that carriage is suspicious, and it's not Meng Hun's group in disguise. The attendant who followed Jiang Pingji around the west and east districts had a helpless look on his face. Then tell me, why did they stop? The leader asked. The attendant was stunned for a moment and then stuttered, I guess there are too many people watching the show and they're blocking the way. The leader, yes, they were used to running amok in Zhangzhou. They never had the concept of stopping for passers-by. They just ran amok. But this was Hejin County. In other words, he had thought that he was smart, but in fact he was just being stupid. The leader's face darkened when he thought about it. Or rather, it was as dark as the bottom of a pot. Leader, we've been here for a day and we haven't found Meng Hun and his group. We can't catch them. What should we do now? Meng Liang had been kidnapped by Meng Hun. It was definitely not a good sign. But the leader thought that Meng Liang was not dead and he had a good reason. The leader said firmly, "Go back quickly and tell the master about Second Longjuan's kidnapping. We can't afford to delay." Some of the attendants were still reluctant to make the decision. "Leader, if something happens to Second Langjun, won't we be?" The attendant made a gesture of cutting his neck with his hand. He looked very nervous. He was not afraid of death. The leader shook his head and said, "Second Langjun is definitely not dead. Meng Hun doesn't have the guts. Otherwise," the attendant asked seriously, "why? Isn't it simple?" The leader opened the 2 bamboo slips and pointed at the one written by Meng Liang. He said with certainty, "Haven't you noticed that Second Longjuan's writing is neat, clear and steady? It doesn't look like it was written by a panicked person. In other words, Second Langjun must have been sure that he would not die. That's why he wrote this letter. But this Meng Hun is asking for 2,000 dawn of food. Isn't he afraid of being stuffed to death?" 2,000 dawn of food was not a small amount. But food was not a big deal. As long as Meng Liang was alive and well, everything would be fine. "Leader, you're so wise." A few attendants flattered him one after another, their mouths uttering flattering and auspicious words of flattery. "So now is not the time to be hesitant. We have to send these 2 bamboo slips back as soon as possible. As long as we can save Second Langjun, it will be a great achievement. Even if the master blames us, who doesn't know that Second Longjuan's disappearance was because of his naughtiness? Even if there was a punishment, it would not be a heavy one. They would even be rewarded with a lot of money after the incident." Unfortunately, the leader thought that Meng Hun and his men would be impatient and come to check on what had happened in the gambling house. That was why he decided to wait on the 2nd floor of the tea house across the street. But after waiting for half a day, all the bodies in the gambling house had been cleaned up, but there was still no sign of Meng Hun. The leader said, "Pack up and get ready to go back to Zhangzhou. Hey guys, where do you think Hejian County is? That you can come and go as you please? Let's all go." A strange voice came from behind. The leader and his attendants were immediately alerted. They looked at the person who spoke. "Sko, you killed someone here and you still want to walk away? There's no such thing as a free lunch in this world." These people were all guards of the Hejian County Governor's office. Each of them had a knife at their waist, so they were quite capable. The 2 sides were in a stalemate, but a strong dragon could not beat a snake in its own land. The leader of the Mengs snorted coldly. He said arrogantly, "How can you catch me now? How are you going to send me back later?" Hearing what he said, the people of Hejian County were instantly filled with righteous indignation. They wanted to pull out their knives and cut them into pieces. Stubborn. The corners of the guard's mouth froze. He looked extremely indignant. Chapter 191. How much power did the Mengs of Zhangzhou have in Dongqing? The Hejian County chief had only heard about it before. Now that he had seen it with his own eyes, he was furious. What did they mean by he was just a small county chief with a title but no power? What could a small official do to him? This is too much. This is too much. The Mengs of Zhangzhou are too much. The Hejian County chief was so angry that he flipped over the table. The fat on his body shook with his movement, and the mustache on his lips almost curled up. It was true that Hejian County was just a small county according to the size of the land and the number of people. But since it was a county, he deserved to be the Hejian County chief. How could he tolerate being humiliated by the servants of the Mengs? The guards of the Hejian County chief's manor who had escorted the people there also looked furious. The leader grinned hideously, raised his hand and patted the shoulder of the leader of the guards. He whispered to him, "I told you how you brought me here and how you sent me out. Why do you have to humiliate yourself? Let's go." The leader waved his hand and the 20 or 30 people swaggered out of the Hejian County chief's manor. They were extremely arrogant. In the distance, Jiang Pingji lifted the curtain of the carriage coldly and looked at the arrogant people quietly. They were like roosters who had won a fight. The audience in the streaming room did not witness the whole process, nor did they see how arrogant those people were in the Hejian County chief's manor. However, based on the words of the leader, many people said that they were too arrogant. If they had the ability, why didn't they explode on the spot? I don't agree with the streamer. I'm so angry that my lungs are about to explode. Even Li Gang's son was not so arrogant. The leader was just a servant of the Mengs. How could he be so arrogant? He would not even survive the second episode in a TV series. Xianxia. To put it bluntly, not only did he survive the second episode, but he also walked out of the Hejian County Chief's manor alive. Ili Shabai. Alas, that's how the ancient society was. Power could crush people to death. Time passes between fingers. It's really annoying. Although I know that people's lives were worthless in ancient times, I didn't expect it to be so cheap. There were at least 50 to 60 corpses brought out of the casino. That was 50 to 60 lives. Pianxian Diawu. Oh, I don't agree with the saying that time flies. The correct way to put it should be, the lives of civilians are like weeds or even less than weeds. The lives of people with social status are precious. The atmosphere in the live broadcast room was a little quiet. Previously, when they stopped outside the gambling house, many viewers had already left due to the pressure. It was just that the queue for the live stream was always full. After a wave of people was pushed out, there would still be new people filling in. The number of people online had always been stable at 10,000. Jiang Pingji looked at it coldly for a while and suddenly sent a message in the streaming room. Host V, are you guys afraid of blood? The viewers in the live stream were dumbfounded. Why did he suddenly ask this question? Could it be that his nerve reflex arc was too long? The next second, Jiang Pingji added another one. Host V, if you're not afraid, I'll teach you the right way to kill. For a moment, the entire live streaming channel was silent, and the bullet screen was empty for a long time. In just a moment, her vision was drowned by the overwhelming number of 660 SXs. Ye Qingzhou. Daily brainwashing task. Be impressed by the streamer's handsomeness, completed January 1st. Pianxian Diawu. Let's not talk about anything else, just based on the streamer's straightforwardness. I have to give you a string of 666. Ili Shabai. Do you still need a leg accessory? You can shout 666 in all kinds of positions. The audience in the streaming room was almost boiling. Jiang Pingji's lips had a trace of a sneer. If you're not happy, you'll fight back. Only a tortoise would swallow his anger. Let's go back first. The carriage's curtain was put down and the coachman lightly whipped the rope. It didn't take long to get to the loose from there. Jiang Pingji directly asked someone to go to the stable and bring the horse over. I have to go out for some things. If father asks where I went, tell him I'll be back before the city gate is locked. Taking the reins, Jiang Pingji easily leaped onto the horse's back. She took a shortcut and avoided the crowded places. Jiang Pingji arrived at the city gate without a hitch. Seeing the indignant expressions on the guards' faces, Jiang Pingji calmed down. She murmured in a low voice, "It looks like they just passed the city gate. I should still be able to make it." The inspection at the city gate was not slow. She quickly took the reins and mounted the horse, rushing in the direction of the group. The war horse of the northern borderline was pure white. It had a well-proportioned and handsome body, was good at long-distance raids and had a long endurance. It was a rare and famous horse. It was the first time Jiang Pingji had ridden it except for the gathering. They should be right in front. But the terrain is flat and it's easy to be exposed in a short distance. Let's take a detour and get ahead of them. Seeing the messy and deep hoof prints on the ground, Jiang Pingji's eyes flashed. She slightly pulled the reins and let the horse gallop in another direction. The group of more than 20 people naturally wouldn't expect that someone was following them, waiting for the best time to strike. One of the attendants looked a little worried. He asked the leader, "If the master blames us for abusing the Meng's name, how can that be considered abusing? If it weren't for those people in Hejian County, we would have been at the next station by now." Second Langjun was kidnapped by Meng Hun and his gang. Now is the time to save him. Can they afford to waste such an important time? The leader didn't say anything. It was another attendant who spoke. It was not the first time that he had used the Meng's name for his own benefit. "Shut up, all of you. It's more important to get to the next station as soon as possible." The leader pursed his lips. He was anxious. Since the leader had spoken, the others didn't dare to say anything. They all lowered their heads and hurried on. Because of the delay, they couldn't get to the nearest station. The horses were exhausted and needed a rest. The leader looked at the sky and wiped the sweat off his forehead with his sleeve. Let's rest here first. He sat on a small stool and rested. His whole body was covered in sweat. The others also looked tired. They had rushed to Hejian County after receiving the news from Meng Liang, but they were too late. Meng Hun had already kidnapped Meng Hun. In order to send the scroll back to Zhangzhou as soon as possible, they had to continue their journey. In other words, they hadn't slept for a day and a night. They wanted to go to the nearest station to rest and prepare enough food and water to feed the horses, but they still didn't make it in time. Leader, we're out of water and food. If they had known this would happen, they would have restocked in Hejian County first. Now they were in the middle of nowhere. It was too cruel. Just send 3 people out to look for him. Rest for an hour. Don't be late. Hejian County was surrounded by deep mountains. There were many ferocious birds and beasts. With their skills, it was easy for them to hunt small prey. On the other side, Jiang Pingji was hiding nearby. She could hear their conversation clearly. Chapter 192. Those horses are good horses. Why don't we take some? It's also a fortune. Jiang Pingji hid in the dark and carefully observed the group. When her eyes fell on the horses, she couldn't help but feel excited. Although those horses were not as good as the best horses, they had excellent bloodlines and belonged to the Meng's stable. The Meng's was the only one among the 4 noble families that started with military achievements. They also owned the largest stable in Dongqing. Zhangzhou was located at the intersection of trade routes, so it was very convenient for all kinds of business. The Meng's imported many famous horses from the northern borderline or the southern Man. After several generations of breeding, most of the horses in the stable were of excellent quality. However, they only sold the inferior horses. The best and the best quality horses had to be offered to the main family of the Meng family or given to the Meng family as compensation to the army of the Meng family. The royal family of Dongqing wanted good horses, so they had to buy them from the northern borderline or the southern Man at a high price. By chance, they learned that the Mengs also had good horses, so the emperor hinted in various ways, hoping that the Mengs would offer a batch of good horses to him. What was the result? The Mengs did not take the emperor seriously at all. They offered a batch of inferior quality horses as a tribute, and bluntly said that the best horses from the stud farm were to be sent to the Mengs army. Not a single one of those good horses was allowed to flow out. This made the emperor of Dongqing very angry. However, the Mengs were indeed not to be trifled with. The emperor of Dongqing was already burning with anger, but he had to maintain an open-minded and hearty appearance. Jiang Pingji didn't want the horses at first, or she didn't even think about it. But their owner was going to die soon. Wouldn't it be a pity if she didn't accept them? As a good girl who didn't like to waste any resources, Jiang Pingji said that the horses were now hers. What if she didn't agree? Hold it in. He sent 3 experienced followers to search for food and water, while the others rested and recovered their strength. I heard that there are many bandits in Hejian. Do you think the 3 of them will run into them? They sat down to rest and the attendants started chatting. Hey, as long as they are not blind, which bandit will give us trouble? Not to mention 3 people going out together, even if there's only one person, which one of us from the Meng family army doesn't have the imposing manner to fight against 10,000 people? What's so scary about a few mobs? Don't you think so? At the mention of the Meng army's prestige, the attendants suddenly felt a surge of confidence. Indeed, in the whole of Dongqing and even the other 4 countries, who did not know of the reputation of the Meng army? They had guarded Zhangzhou for many years and helped the royal family of Dongqing protect the vital parts of the country. Wasn't it all thanks to them that Dongqing was able to celebrate peace and prosperity? That's right. But in my opinion, the strongest among us is still the leader. Even that Meng Hun can't compare to you. A follower gently flattered him, and the group of people seemed to have received some sort of hint. Flattery flooded their leader like a tide. The corners of his lips couldn't help but curl up. His heart swayed, and he waited until he was satisfied with the feeling of floating on air before he reprimanded her with a stern face. The leader furrowed his brows and seemed to be very displeased. We're asking you to fix up now, not to gossip like a bunch of gossipy women. If you don't want to rest, then say so earlier. Meng Hun. Ah, a stray dog who betrayed his master isn't qualified to compare to me. The leader is right. We were wrong. How can that hypocritical stray dog Meng Hun compare to you? One of the attendants quickly changed his words and flattered the leader with his glib tongue. This attendant clearly had a face full of righteousness, but his eyes darted around from time to time, looking extremely restless. When it came to flattering, he was more active than anyone else. The other attendants immediately followed up and opened their mouths to say, Meng Hun is not qualified to compare to the leader. If you want to compare throughout the whole of Dongqing, only the Count of Jinbei's residence is qualified to compare to the leader. I heard that they were beaten up in the northern borderline again. In my opinion, if the leader was the leader with your talent, you would definitely be able to turn the situation around and beat those bastards in the northern borderline back to their grandmother's house. After hearing this, the leader was in a good mood, as if he was shouting a piece of ice in the hottest days of the year. His whole body was icy cold. The few of them talked about everything and flattered the leader. After a quarter of an hour, the 3 attendants from before still hadn't returned. Of course they couldn't come back. The 3 attendants were experienced in surviving in the wilderness, but compared to Jiang Pingji they paled in comparison. She quickly found the nearest water source and laid in ambush, waiting for the 3 prey to take the bait. Soon the 3 figures came together. One of them said in surprise, "There is water here. You're the best. Don't talk anymore. Fill the water bags first." The 3 of them were carrying many empty leather water bags. If they were to fill all of them and bring them back, the weight would not be light. Jiang Pingji looked at them coldly and squatted down beside the pool. She steadily raised the bow in her hand. She took out 2 arrows from the quiver and quickly drew the bow to a full moon. Swoosh, swoosh. The 2 arrows sank into the brains of the 2 attendants, piercing through the back of their heads. They were instantly killed. The 3rd person was originally seriously filling the water bag with water. Suddenly, he noticed that the surface of the water beside him was dyed red with eye-catching blood. He was slightly stunned. The 2 companions who were talking and laughing with him just a second ago opened their eyes wide in disbelief and fell head-first into the pool. Enemy. 2 words suddenly popped up in the mind of the 3rd person. The water bag in his hand fell to the ground and wet the soil by the shore. He jumped up abruptly and pulled out the broadsword from his waist. He vigilantly looked around. Following the direction of the arrows, he did not see any traces of anyone. How many enemies were there? Where were they? For a moment, these 2 questions popped up in his mind. The more he thought about it, the more nervous he became. He tensed up and stayed on guard for a long time. Still no one attacked him. It was as if the 2 arrows that killed his companions appeared out of thin air. The person looked at the bodies of his 2 companions and nervously pursed his lips. Then he gritted his teeth and staggered away. "Ye Qingzhou, host, you let them go just like that? Letting a tiger return to the mountain will cause endless trouble." Yumei, although I think killing is very bloody, the host situation is a special case. You can't generalize. Letting the enemy go is harsher to yourself. That person went to inform the others and called everyone over. Can the host deal with so many people alone? Mu Qingfeng, I want to convince myself that the host can kill more than 20 people, but the host is still a bean sprout, right? Lu Lanting's body was only 12 years old. Compared to the burly men who were 7 feet tall, she was as petite as a white rabbit. Just the difference in physique alone made the viewers in the streaming room nervous. They could not help but break out in cold sweat for Jiang Pingji. Jiang Pingji did not care about the fish that escaped the net. Naturally, her target was not just 2 people. Chapter 193. Host V, don't worry. Letting 1 fish go is just to attract more stupid fish. She sneered, leaped up and landed on the dense tree trunk. Her footsteps were light as she walked away. The enemy was in the light while she was in the dark. She always had the initiative. Thanks to the high mountains and deep forests in Hejin County, it was very convenient to hide. Besides, Jiang Pingji knew how not to leave any traces. She shuttled through the forest freely like a dragon in the sea. Bad news. Bad news. Leader, there's an enemy attack. The surviving follower ran towards the crowd in a panic. He almost couldn't catch his breath. His lips were pale and he kept muttering, "Enemy attack. 2 of our brothers were killed just now." "What? Enemy attack? And 2 of our men were killed?" The leader suddenly stood up from the small stool, took 2 steps forward, approached the surviving follower and said sternly, "What enemy attack? The follower gasped for a while and finally could barely tell. Just now, I was fetching water with the other two. Suddenly, two black figures flashed by and attacked us with arrows. We were careless and the other two were shot in the head and they died. The leader's eyes widened in disbelief and then he became violent. The people he brought were killed by a sneak attack outside. It must have been done by the bandits near Zhou County. They were really bold. Then you came back just like that. The surviving follower's eyes were red and he said in a tearful voice, "Leader, I also want to fight those two beasts to avenge my brother, but I still have to save my life, so I came to report to my brothers. My brother's life can't be lost in vain. If others were to find out that our Meng family army was ambushed and killed by two bandits, where would we put our faces?" The leader listened with a gloomy face and his hands clenched into fists. He suddenly took out his whip and he was full of anger. These mobs have gone too far. The leader gritted his teeth and then he ordered 20 people, "Let's go to avenge our brothers." Jiang Pingji's 5 senses were no longer suppressed, and she could hear their conversation from this distance. She couldn't help but laugh. The audience in the streaming room could also clearly hear their conversation with the help of the system. Suddenly, there was a sea of 2,333. Gu Mimi, you have a big imagination. You said it as if you saw it with your own eyes. He doesn't even know where the streamer is and he said he saw 2 black figures. Is it just because the streamer shot 2 arrows at once? That's ridiculous. Lao Ciji Lianmeng. If the streamer makes 3 consecutive kills later, shouldn't they say that there were 5 people who attacked them? Mu Yu Qingfeng, they have to say that. If they don't make the situation more dangerous, how can they explain that they were so scared that they peed their pants and left their brothers' bodies and ran away? He was still too young. If he was a little more thick-skinned, he might have directly bragged that there was a platoon of bandits watching him, that he was skilled in martial arts, and that he had broken through the encirclement left and right and finally escaped. Everybody lift chestnut together. I'm impressed by the comment above. Jiang Pingji waited in a good mood. Although she was not used to using ancient bows and arrows, it was the same as a sniper. Compared with a sniper, she preferred to move from one place to another after shooting. Bows and arrows could not be compared with a sniper rifle. The former's speed and destructive power were too small. Squatting in the same place was simply telling the enemy where she was. Host V. Lao Ciji Lianmeng, I think your suggestion is acceptable. Jiang Pingji drew 3 arrows from the quiver, raised the bowstring to a full moon and did not move. She squinted her sharp eyes, waiting for the best opportunity. There were 5 people left to guard the horses and luggage. They seemed to be standing loosely but they were actually very alert. The young man who had survived was left behind. He ran in a panic and accidentally fell twice. He looked very embarrassed. His companion comforted him. Look at you. 2 bandits scared you so much. Look, hasn't the leader already brought people over? If the leader goes out, not to mention 2 bandits, even an entire bandit stronghold will be wiped out by him. The surviving follower was still shivering. His forehead was stained with 2 pieces of mud. Blood mixed with the mud. He smiled reluctantly and was about to look up to thank her when a shadow blocked the sun above his head. The next second, a warm weight fell on him, catching him off guard. Warm, scarlet blood dripped onto his face and almost into his eyes. Whoosh! Jiang Pingji could not shoot 2 arrows at the same time because of her position. It was difficult to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, so she shot continuously at a very fast speed. Enemy, enemy, enemy attack. The attendant raised his hand and pushed away his companion whose brain had been pierced through. His vision was restored, but there were 4 more corpses around him. Before they could react, they had already passed away. The horse that was quietly nibbling on the grass did not panic at all, nor was it frightened. It was as if the 4 arrows that took their lives just flew out of thin air, without a trace of murderous intent. Jiang Pingji glanced at the follower's almost collapsed expression with satisfaction. Her eyes darkened and she turned back to the previous pool. At that moment, the leader had brought people to the pool where the incident happened. 2 bodies were floating alone, blood stained the water, and the 2 arrows that had pierced through their brains were still hanging on them. The leader's face darkened and he asked people to go forward and fish up the bodies. Chapter 194. Just as he finished speaking, an arrow pierced through the air, directly piercing through the chest of a person who was standing relatively far away. Ugh! A muffled sound rang out and everyone looked towards the source of the sound, just in time to see the man raising his hand to cover his chest, a look of disbelief on his face. They saw his burly body slowly fall backwards, blood flowing out from his completely shattered heart, staining the ground red. Before he died, his eyes were still wide open as if he had seen a malicious ghost. The scene was creepy. Could it be that there were really malicious ghosts in the forest? Don't panic. You are a man. Why are you afraid of ghosts? The leader shouted, which brought everyone back to their senses. He raised his sword and walked a few steps toward the direction where the arrow came from with a gloomy face. The grass and shrubs could not withstand the sharpness of the sword and were chopped down to the ground. No, still no trace. Where was the ambusher hiding? The leader looked at the ground where there was no trace of a living person. His expression was like a wall with a few cracks. Another scream was heard. Another man was pierced through the chest by an unknown arrow. The direction of the arrow was far away from the leader. The leader hurried back and saw that the man was dead. Just like the previous man, he was shot in the heart and died. He checked the wound and could no longer control his violent emotions. Since he began to work for the Mengs, he was used to being flattered and flattered. When had he ever been humiliated like this? He was toyed with by a bunch of nobodies who came out of nowhere. What was even more hateful was that the other party had never revealed themselves from the beginning to the end. Playing tricks on us. We don't need to be afraid of them. The leader stood up and said to the others, "Are you all stupid? They pointed their arrows at you and you didn't feel it at all. You are still standing in twos and threes." The leader's scolding made the others tremble. They did not dare to be so careless and spread out in twos and threes. Instead, they formed a more orderly formation. Compared to the unknown malicious ghost, the leader was more terrifying. Seeing that, Jiang Pingji had already quietly moved to another place. How stupid. It doesn't feel challenging at all. Jiang Pingji smiled. The enemy was in the light while she was in the dark. She had the initiative in her hands. Regardless of whether the enemy gathered in a group or dispersed in twos or threes, it was all useless unless they could feel her breath or detect her murderous actions in advance. Killing aura seemed illusory, but it really existed. It was just that it couldn't be touched or seen. Some martial artists worked hard to train themselves and improve their five senses. They would vaguely develop a mysterious intuition. When others stared at them, they would feel it, not to mention the killing intent that was filled with malice. The leader was indeed capable. His five senses had also reached such a level that he could sense the killing intent and stares of others. However, how could Jiang Pingji's standard be the same as theirs? A genetic warrior whose killing intent could be sensed by others was already the worst of the worst. It was simply impossible for him to participate in a mission. Jiang Pingji also had rich experience in sniping and killing. She succeeded every time. If she could not perfectly restrain this killing intent and reduce her presence by 100%, according to the five senses of the people in the future, it would not be called a sneak attack. It would be telling the enemy her position and trying to kill them. Then what was there to play? The audience in the streaming room was watching excitedly. It seemed that after the shock of seeing blood for the first time, they had calmed down. Wanyue, #laughter cry. I have a déjà vu of a high-level golden godly outfit massacring the novice players in the novice village. A's Huohua. It's obviously a godly character who has ascended to immortality. Zhongfei Xingchen of last night. It's better to be crushed. Feels good. I like the feeling of killing a bunch of small monsters with one slash. Jiang Pingji curled her lips. Huddling together would only make them die more quickly. Host V. I'll show you what it means to kill two birds with one stone. As soon as she finished speaking, the arrow had already pierced through the air. Jiang Pingji changed to another place without looking back. Swoosh, an arrow pierced through the air. The crowd only noticed its existence when it got close, but it was too late. Another two. Jiang Pingji did not have to look to know that she had taken down two more enemies. At that moment, the number of casualties had reached a terrifying number. They did not see the shadow of the ambushers from beginning to end, but their companions fell one after another. The leader was safe and sound in the middle, but the two people who had been killed were very close to him. They fell in the direction of the leader. With such archery skills, they can't be bandits. The leader pushed the body that fell on him away. A trace of unwillingness flashed across his face. However, he also knew that if they continued to stay in the dense forest, they would only silently lose more people. Could it be the people in Hejian County seeking revenge? One of the followers guessed with fear. The leader snorted coldly and said contemptuously, "Those people don't have the guts to. If this was not the case, that was not the case. Then who was the culprit? Could it be that a malicious ghost really appeared in broad daylight?" For a moment, everyone was in a state of panic. Seeing them retreat and then looking at the reserves in the quiver, Jiang Pingji's smile was somewhat evil. Since they had already set foot on the road to hell, how could they escape? It was not difficult for Jiang Pingji to shoot while moving. The only difficulty was that she had to pay attention to hiding while moving. The atmosphere became more terrifying and gloomy. The tense atmosphere and the shadow of death shrouded everyone's hearts. Dong, the head of one of the followers who fell at the back of the group, was pierced through from the temple by an arrow. He was directly nailed to a tree trunk not far away. "What are you panicking for? Retreat." The leader heard the strange sound at the back of the group. His heart suddenly sank. He knew that another life had been quietly taken. The same scene happened one after another. Jiang Pingji was like the most experienced hunter. It was as if she had thoroughly understood the dense forest. No matter how the group of people ran or panicked, she could maintain a fairly safe range. She was like an experienced cat, and those people were the mice that she chased. She destroyed their psychological defenses bit by bit. When she was done playing with them, she would kill them with one blow. The leader was about to have a nervous breakdown after being shot one after another. Even though he looked calm on the surface, he still could not hide the guilt in his heart. Yes, guilt. He couldn't sense where the arrows were coming from, and he didn't know what their target was. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.